There are moments in human history that divide time into before and after. Moments when everything we thought we understood about ourselves, about our past, about the very nature of civilization, shifts. The 12th of October 2019 was one of those moments. But you probably didn't hear about it. Most of the world didn't. This is the story of what was found 400 meters beneath the Atlantic Ocean, a discovery that would force us to ask questions we spent centuries trying to forget. Questions about who built the first cities, who understood the stars before telescopes existed, who possessed knowledge that shouldn't have been possible, and most troubling of all, what happened to them. The answers lie in ruins that shouldn't exist, in texts written in languages no one remembers, in warnings carved into stone by people who knew they were about to disappear from history. They left us messages deliberately, carefully. They wanted us to find them. They wanted us to know what they learned, what they built, what destroyed them, and what they desperately tried to preserve before the end. This isn't a story about mythology or legend. This is about metal and stone, about coordinates and carbon dating, about archaeologists and linguists who found something real, something that changes the entire timeline of human civilization. They found a city where no city should exist. They found technology that predates recorded history by thousands of years. They found warnings written specifically for us. And what they found suggests that everything we've been taught about human history might be incomplete. The story you are about to hear spans 11,500 years. It begins with a discovery in 2019, reaches back to a civilization that existed before the pyramids, and ends with a question we must answer now. Will we learn from what destroyed them, or will we repeat their mistakes? Close your eyes if you like. Get comfortable, let the world outside fade away, because we're going back to the night everything changed. Back to when the ocean revealed its oldest secret. Back to Atlantis. The Atlantic Ocean at night is a different world. No light from the sun penetrates the depths. No sound from the surface reaches down. Just pressure, darkness, and cold that would crush human bones like paper. But on the 12th of October 2019, something down there was about to reach up to us. Dr. Helena Vasquez wasn't looking for anything extraordinary that night. She was mapping underwater trade routes, the kind of work that makes funding committees yawn and produces papers that 3 people read. Necessary work, important work, boring work. Her research vessel, the Poseidon, SI, rocked gently 200 kilometers west of the Strait of Gibraltar. The crew had been at sea for 6 weeks. They mapped ancient shipwreck sites, catalogued amphora fragments, documented Roman pottery scatters, the kind of discoveries that fill museums but don't make headlines. Marcus Chen, the ship's sonar technician, was on night shift. Just him and the machines, the soft glow of screens in the darkness, the rhythmic beeping of depth sensors. He'd been doing this work for 12 years. He knew what underwater terrain looked like on sonar. He knew the difference between a rock formation and a shipwreck, between a reef and a ridge. What appeared on his screen at 2:47 a.m. was neither. The sonar was scanning at 400 meters depth, far below where ancient ships would sink, far below where divers could reach without specialized equipment. The ocean floor at this depth is supposed to be organic chaos, mounds and valleys carved by currents, stones scattered by geological forces, life growing in patterns that follow no human logic. But the image forming on Marcus' screen showed right angles, perfect right angles. Parallel lines extending for hundreds of meters, geometric patterns too precise to be accidental, surfaces too flat to be natural. He stared at the screen for a full minute, watching as the sonar sweep built the image line by line, rectangular structures, circular formations, symmetrical patterns. His hands were shaking when he reached for the radio. Dr. Vasquez was asleep in her cabin when the call came. She'd been dreaming of home, her daughter's 5th birthday party, the cake shaped like a castle, the ordinary beautiful life waiting for her when this expedition ended. Marcus' voice pulled her back to the ship. "Helena, you need to see this. Now." She'd known Marcus long enough to recognize the tone. Not excitement, not quite fear, something else. Something that made her pull on clothes without fully waking, stumble through the corridor with her heart already racing. The control room was dark except for the screens. Marcus pointed without speaking. Dr. Vasquez had spent 15 years searching for evidence that the ancient world was more connected than historians believed. She'd studied anomalies in Mediterranean trade patterns, tracked pottery styles that appeared in locations they shouldn't, followed hints that some knowledge spread too quickly to be explained by known contact between civilizations. She never told her colleagues, but privately, she wondered about Atlantis. Not the New Age fantasy, not the mystical portal to other dimensions, but the simpler, stranger possibility that Plato hadn't been inventing philosophy through fiction, that he been documenting something real. She memorized the passage from Timaeus. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules there was an island, larger than Libya and Asia combined, the Strait of Gibraltar, the ancient Pillars of Hercules, 200 kilometers west. Exactly where they were now. She leaned closer to the screen, her breath fogging the glass. The image was unmistakable. Walls, buildings, streets laid out in concentric circles. "Run it again," she whispered. "Scan the entire area. I need to know how far this extends." They ran the scan 17 times before dawn. Each pass revealed more. The structures covered at least 12 square kilometers. Concentric rings, exactly as Plato had described. A city that shouldn't exist, in a location that matched a 240-year-old text. Dr. Vasquez sat in silence as the sun rose, watching the sonar images compile into an impossible map. She, spent 15 years searching. She, found more than she, ever imagined. And she had no idea what it would cost her to reveal it. Athens, 360 BCE. An old man sits in the shade of an olive tree, stylus in hand, wax tablet on his lap. His name is Plato, and he is writing about something that troubles him. A story passed down through generations, a warning disguised as history. He calls it Atlantis. We've been arguing about what Plato meant ever since. Was it allegory? Political philosophy masked as myth? A thought experiment about the ideal state corrupted by ambition? But here is what makes Atlantis different from every other story Plato told. He didn't frame it as philosophy. He framed it as fact. In Timaeus and Critias, Plato provides a chain of transmission. Egyptian priests tell the Greek lawmaker Solon, around 590 BCE. Solon tells Plato, grandfather. The story passes through Plato's family for 2 centuries. Plato writes it down. And what he writes isn't vague myth. It is specific, detailed, geographic. Beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar, there was an island. Not a metaphorical island, a real place, larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. He describes the city's layout, concentric rings of water and land, alternating in precise patterns. He provides dimensions. The outer ring was 3 stades wide, the middle ring 2 stades, the inner sanctum 1 stade. He describes the materials, black, white, and red stone quarried from the island itself. He details their technology. They built bridges and canals, underground tunnels, irrigation systems. They had hot and cold running water. They worked metals that other civilizations hadn't discovered. He describes their government, a confederation of 10 kings, each ruling a portion of the empire, meeting to make collective decisions. He gives us their timeline, 9,000 years before Solon's visit to Egypt. That would place Atlantis at approximately 9,600 BCE, 11,600 years ago, and he tells us how it ended, in a single day and night, destroyed by earthquakes and floods. The island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea and vanished. Ancient scholars took this seriously. Aristotle, Plato's student, questioned it, but questioned it as history, not dismissed it as fiction. Crantor, a philosopher who studied Plato's texts in the 3rd century BCE, claimed he'd seen Egyptian records that confirmed the account. For over 1,000 years, scholars treated Atlantis as historical puzzle, not mythological fable. The shift happened gradually. Medieval scholars, lacking the technology to explore ocean depths, decided it must be metaphor. If they could find it, it must not exist. Renaissance thinkers in love with reason and skepticism relegated it to legend. By the modern era, Atlantis had become a joke, something for television documentaries with dramatic music and no evidence, something serious academics didn't discuss. But no one could quite explain why Plato would write it the way he did. He was a philosopher. When he wanted to use fiction to illustrate ideas, he was explicit about it. His Republic is clearly philosophical thought experiment. His allegory of the cave is obviously allegory. But Atlantis, he frames it as history. He He provides sources. He gives coordinates. What if the real question is whether Atlantis existed, but why we stopped believing it did? Maybe it is easier to think our civilization is the first, the pinnacle, the unprecedented achievement of human progress. Maybe it is uncomfortable to consider that we might not be the first attempt, that others came before us, achieved great things, and vanished. Maybe we dismissed Atlantis not because the evidence was weak, but because the implications were too troubling. Dr. Vasquez thought about this as she looked at the sonar images. Plato had given exact coordinates, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, in the Atlantic. For 2,400 years, people had looked in wrong places. The Mediterranean, the Caribbean, Antarctica, even Indonesia. What if the simplest answer was the right one? What if Plato meant exactly what he said? 200 kilometers west of Gibraltar, 400 meters down. Concentric rings of structures. Dr. Vasquez opened her worn copy of Timaeus. She carried it on every expedition for 15 years, reading it like some people read the Bible, looking for hidden meaning, searching for clues. Now she didn't need to search. The clues were on her sonar screen, matching Plato's description with impossible precision. He hadn't been creating philosophy. He'd been documenting something real. And now, after 11,500 years of silence, Atlantis was ready to speak again. Dr. Vasquez was the first to look. For centuries, explorers and dreamers have searched for Atlantis, each convinced they found the key, the location, the proof that would vindicate Plato and rewrite history. In 1882, Ignatius Donnelly published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, arguing that Atlantis was the source civilization from which all ancient cultures descended. He placed it in the mid-Atlantic, now submerged beneath the ocean ridge. His research was detailed, his evidence compelling, his conclusions dismissed by academia. In 1960s, Soviet submarines began systematically mapping the Atlantic Ocean floor. Classified documents later revealed they detected unusual formations, geometric patterns in regions where sonar imaging was still primitive and interpretation uncertain. The sites were flagged for future investigation. That investigation never came, or rather it never became public. In 1973, an American expedition led by Dr. Maxine Asher claimed to have found walls, roads, and buildings off the coast of Spain. The findings made news briefly, then vanished from public discussion when funding disappeared and academic institutions refused to support follow-up expeditions. In the 1990s, satellite imaging technology improved enough to detect structures beneath ocean sediment. Images of the Straits of Gibraltar region showed regular geometric patterns at precisely the depths where Atlantis should lie, if it existed. The images were published, analyzed, then explained away as natural geological formations. Despite the regularity that made such formations statistically improbable, every generation, someone got close. Every time, the search ended. Sometimes it was funding, sometimes it was academic skepticism, sometimes it was simply the ocean's vastness. Millions of square kilometers to search, most beyond diving depth, all requiring expensive equipment and specialized expertise. But patterns emerge when you study failed searches. Equipment malfunctions at crucial moments. Funding evaporates just as promising sites are located. Governments suddenly designate areas as restricted zones. Data gets classified. Researchers move on to other projects. It is easy to dismiss this as coincidence, as the normal friction of archaeological research, where most searches find nothing and most promising leads dead end. But Dr. Vasquez had studied every major Atlantis expedition for the past century. She noticed something troubling. Expeditions that found nothing continued to receive funding, published their negative results, and maintained academic respectability. Expeditions that found anomalies, geometric formations, unusual materials, anything suggesting human construction in impossible locations. Those expeditions ended quickly and quietly. She learned to be careful when her sonar detected the structures. She didn't immediately broadcast the discovery. She ran dozens of scans first, documented everything, made multiple backups of all data, sent encrypted files to colleagues she trusted. She read enough history to know important discoveries don't always make it into textbooks. Sometimes they disappear into classified archives. Sometimes they re-debunked before anyone examines the evidence. Sometimes the searchers themselves become cautionary tales. Obsessives, pseudoscientists, believers in ancient aliens and mystical portals. Dr. Vasquez wasn't a believer. She was a scientist, and the data on her screen was belief. It was coordinates, measurements, sonar reflection patterns that indicated stone structures at 400 meters depth. She was about to become the latest in a long line of searchers. The question was whether her search would end like all the others, or whether this time, finally, Atlantis would be allowed to be found. The submersible Triton III was cramped, cold, and smelled like machine oil and recycled air. Dr. Vasquez and Marcus Chen sat in darkness as the vessel descended, watching depth gauges count down through zones where progressively fewer forms of life could survive. 100 meters, sunlight fades. 200 meters, darkness becomes absolute. 300 meters, pressure reaches levels that would collapse human lungs. 400 meters, the depth where the sonar said something impossible waited. The submersible S-lights created narrow cones of visibility in the black water, about 10 meters of sight in an ocean that extended for miles in every direction. Schools of fish occasionally flickered through the beams, silver flashes that appeared and vanished like thoughts. "We, reapproaching the coordinates," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled excitement, 30 meters out. Dr. Vasquez, hands were pressed against the small viewing port, her breath fogging the reinforced acrylic. She'd been on dozens of submersible dives. She'd explored Roman shipwrecks, Phoenician trade routes, Bronze Age anchors. But this was different. Every discovery before this had been expected. Interesting variations on known history. What the sonar suggested was down here shouldn't he exist at all. 20 meters, I am seeing, Helena, I am seeing structure. The lights swept across something that made Dr. Vasquez' breath catch. A wall, not rocks that coincidentally formed wall-like shapes, not geological strata that might, with imagination, resemble masonry. An actual wall constructed. Intentional, impossible. Massive stone blocks, each easily 50 tons, fitted together with precision that would impress modern engineers. The joints between blocks were so tight that not even sediment had penetrated. No gaps, no spaces, just stone touching stone with microscopic tolerance. Marcus, what is the carbon date on the sediment? The samples we took earlier, preliminary results, say 11,500 years plus or minus 200 years. The age matched Plato's timeline exactly. That should have been thrilling. Instead, it was terrifying, because walls like this, precision construction, massive blocks, sophisticated engineering, these things appeared in human history around 3000 BCE at the earliest, in Egypt, in Sumeria, in the first great civilizations, but not 11,500 years ago, not when humans were supposed to be hunter-gatherers living in small bands, barely beginning to experiment with agriculture, not when humans were supposed to be incapable of building anything more complex than temporary shelters. The submersible moved along the wall. Dr. Vasquez documented everything with cameras and laser measurement tools. The wall wasn't crude or primitive. It showed understanding of structural engineering, of load distribution, of long-term stability. And then the lights caught something that made her forget to breathe. Symbols, carved into the stone, deliberate, systematic. Writing, not random scratches, not decorative patterns, a written language. Hundreds of symbols covering the wall surface, arranged in horizontal lines, organized into what looked like paragraphs. Some symbols repeated frequently, common words or grammatical markers. Others appeared only once, names perhaps, or technical terms. "Are you recording this?" Dr. Vasquez whispered. Every second she pressed her face against the viewing port, trying to memorize the symbols. They weren't Egyptian hieroglyphics or Sumerian cuneiform or Chinese characters or any written system in the archaeological record. This was something else, something older, something that shouldn't exist 11,500 years ago, when humans weren't supposed to have developed writing at all. The first writing systems in conventional history appear around 3200 BCE in Sumeria and Egypt. Sophisticated systems, yes, but appearing suddenly without clear developmental stages. Scholars had always puzzled over that sudden emergence, how writing seemed to appear fully formed. What if it didn't emerge? What if it was remembered? Marcus, how far does the wall extend? Sonar shows it continuing for at least 300 meters in both directions. And Helena, there are more walls, parallel structures. This isn't just a wall. This is a city. Yeah, this is a city. They sat in silence, the submersible hovering in the darkness. Lights playing across stones that shouldn't exist, covered in writing that shouldn't have been invented for another 8,000 years. Dr. Vasquez thought about all the searchers who came before, all the expeditions that ended, all the dismissed discoveries and the silenced researchers. She thought about Plato, writing in Athens documenting something everyone now called myth, and she thought about what it meant that he, been right. Atlantis was real, and judging by what they were seeing, it had been far more advanced than anyone had imagined. Over the next 3 weeks, Dr. Vasquez's team made 17 more dives. Each descent revealed more of what lay beneath. The initial wall was just the outer boundary. Beyond it, the structures multiplied, buildings of varying sizes, streets laid out in careful geometric patterns, evidence of urban planning that showed sophisticated mathematical understanding. The city was organized in concentric rings, exactly as Plato had described. 3 rings of land separated by 2 rings of what had once been water channels. Now just gaps between the land structures, sediment, filled but still clearly delineated. The outermost ring contained what appeared to be residential structures, smaller buildings arranged in clusters, with spaces between that suggested gardens or communal areas. The architecture was remarkably advanced, multi-story buildings with interior rooms, evidence of sophisticated construction techniques, designs that showed understanding of structural integrity and aesthetic proportion. The middle ring held larger structures, buildings with grand entrances, interior columns, large central rooms surrounded by smaller chambers. These might have been administrative buildings, temples, gathering halls, the civic architecture of a complex society. And at the center, the inner sanctum, a complex of buildings that dwarfed everything around them. The submersible sonar mapping revealed the full scope gradually, each dive adding pieces to an impossible puzzle. 12 square kilometers, thousands of structures, evidence of city planning that required mathematical sophistication, engineering knowledge, and social organization that shouldn't have existed 11,500 years ago. But there was more than just architecture. The team deployed underwater drones equipped with specialized cameras and sampling equipment. The drones could access smaller spaces, investigate interior rooms, and document details the manned submersible could reach. What they found challenged everything. Dr. Vasquez thought she knew about ancient capabilities. The buildings showed evidence of advanced construction methods, precision, cut stones with complex interlocking patterns, material analysis revealing metallurgical knowledge in the tools used to shape the blocks, architectural features that demonstrated understanding of principles not discovered until Greek and Roman times. Water management systems, channels carved into stone with precise gradients for flow control, reservoir structures that could collect and store water, evidence of fountains and what might have been indoor plumbing. Astronomical alignments, the city's major structures were positioned with clear relationships to celestial movements. The main entrance to the inner sanctum faced precisely toward where the sun would rise on the equinox. Other buildings aligned with the solstices, with the rising positions of specific stars. The people who built this understood astronomy. They tracked the sky with precision. They encoded that knowledge into their architecture. And then there were the decorative elements, proof that this wasn't just functional construction, but culture, art, a civilization with aesthetic values and symbolic language. Stone reliefs carved into walls, showing figures in unknown styles of clothing, geometric patterns that might be purely decorative or might encode mathematical or astronomical information. The team couldn't yet tell which. More writing everywhere, entire walls covered in text, suggesting this was a literate society where writing was common, not restricted to elite scribes. But the most stunning discovery came when Dr. Vasquez herself made a dive to investigate the central complex. In the innermost ring, at what appeared to be the exact center of the entire city, stood a building unlike the others, smaller, but constructed with even greater precision. The walls showed no weathering, no biological growth, no degradation despite 11.5 millennia underwater. This building had been sealed, intentionally sealed, with engineering specifically designed to keep water out. The Team's instruments detected the impossible. The interior of this structure wasn't filled with water. Somehow, incomprehensibly, it had remained airtight for over 11,000 years. "We need to open it," Dr. Vasquez said. Her team disagreed. Opening a sealed chamber risked destroying whatever was inside. Better to document externally, analyze, plan carefully. But Dr. Vasquez felt time pressing. They'd been on site for 3 weeks already. The academic institution she contacted weren't responding to her preliminary reports. The Maritime Authority was asking questions about their permit and expedition scope. She had a growing sense that if they didn't document everything now, they might not get another chance. "We open it next dive," she said. "Document everything, but we reopening it." No one argued. They all felt the same urgency, the same sense that something was watching their discovery, something that might not want them to continue. The sealed chamber waited in the darkness. Inside, preserved in conditions that shouldn't be possible, lay whatever Atlantis had deemed important enough to protect for eternity. The breach took 6 hours of careful work with specialized cutting equipment, slowly removing stone plugs that had sealed the entrance without damaging the structure or flooding the interior. When the final seal lifted, Dr. Vasquez's instruments confirmed what seemed impossible. There was air inside. Not breathable. The composition had changed over 11 millennia, but air, not water. The preservation was perfect. The remotely operated vehicle entered first, its cameras capturing images that made the entire team go silent. The chamber was approximately 10 meters in diameter, circular, with a domed ceiling. The walls were carved with symbols from floor to ceiling, thousands of them, covering every surface. Not random inscriptions, but organized text, arranged in clear sections, categorized, indexed. This was an archive, a library, a deliberate repository of knowledge. But more stunning than the text were the objects. In the center of the room, on a raised stone platform, sat a crystal sphere, approximately 30 centimeters in diameter, perfectly transparent, perfectly smooth, with internal structures visible but impossible to interpret, complex geometric patterns that seemed to shift as the camera angle changed. Around the sphere, arranged in precise positions, were metallic tablets, not stone, not clay, but metal. Analysis would later confirm they were a complex alloy that shouldn't corrode, that shouldn't exist in metallurgy 11,500 years ago. The tablets were covered in the same writing system found throughout the city, but these inscriptions were different, denser, more technical, with symbols and diagrams that looked mathematical or scientific. Along the walls sat additional objects, crystalline structures of various sizes and shapes, metallic devices whose purposes weren't immediately clear, rolled materials that might be maps or astronomical charts. Everything was preserved in pristine condition, protected by the seal and the air-tight environment. But the crystal sphere drew all attention. When the ROVS lights hit it at certain angles, something remarkable happened. The sphere projected images into the air around it. 3-dimensional images, holographic representations, of stars. Dr. Vasquez watched the monitor in stunned silence as the sphere displayed a star map, not of the modern sky, but of the sky as it appeared 11,500 years ago. The constellations were in different positions due to precession of the equinoxes, but the team's astronomer confirmed the positions matched precisely with astronomical calculations for that era. But the map showed more than just stars. It included objects that ancient peoples shouldn't have known about, planets that aren't visible to the naked eye, celestial objects we've only discovered with modern telescopes. The sphere was some kind of astronomical instrument, far more sophisticated than anything that should exist from that period. And it was alone. As the ROV explored further, it found more devices, more crystals, more objects that suggested technological capabilities that conventional history said didn't exist 11,500 years ago. The Atlanteans weren't primitive. They weren't simple stone age people who happened to build impressive walls. They were advanced, sophisticated. They understood astronomy, mathematics, material science, engineering. They had capabilities we're still trying to understand. And they de-sealed all of it in this chamber, not hiding it, but preserving it, protecting it, waiting for someone in the future to find it and understand. They left a message, deliberately for us. Now the question was, could we read it? And more importantly, what were they trying to tell us? Dr. Samuel Okonkwo had spent 20 3 years studying undeciphered scripts, Linear Arongorongo, the Indus Valley script, Proto-Elamite. Languages that no one alive could read, writing systems that had outlived their speakers, mysteries carved into stone and clay. He was used to mysteries, but nothing had prepared him for Atlantean. The team photographed over 10,000 distinct inscriptions from the underwater site. High-resolution imaging captured every symbol, every scratch, every detail. Dr. Okonkwo organized them all, searching for patterns the way codebreakers search for frequency distributions in encrypted messages. The writing system was complex, approximately 340 distinct symbols, more than alphabetic systems like Greek or Latin, fewer than logographic systems like Chinese, a hybrid system, he suspected, using some symbols to represent sounds and others to represent concepts. The first breakthrough came from repetition. Certain symbol sequences appeared again and again throughout the site, on door lintels, at the beginning and end of longer texts. In what appeared to be ceremonial contexts, these were either prayers, formal declarations, or fundamental concepts the culture referenced constantly. One sequence appeared 47 times across the site. Dr. Okonkwo called it the refrain, 7 symbols that showed up in too many contexts to be coincidental. Mathematical inscriptions provided another key. Numbers are universal. Even if cultures count differently, they follow logical patterns. The Atlantean system used base -12, not base -10 like modern mathematics. But once Dr. Okonkwo identified the pattern, he could recognize number sequences. And where there were numbers, there were calculations. Astronomical calculations, architectural measurements, calendar systems. Some symbols appeared only in mathematical contexts. These had to represent numerical or geometric concepts, not words but quantities, relationships, proportions. Slowly, painstakingly, Dr. Okonkwo built a framework. Then came the comparative analysis. He looked at ancient languages known to exist around the same time frame, looking for any overlap, any borrowed symbols, any hint of linguistic relationship. What he found was troubling. Nothing matched. Atlantean showed no relationship to Proto, Indo-European, to Afro-Asiatic languages, to any known linguistic family. It was isolated, unique, suggesting either that it predated all known language families, or that it came from a population completely separate from the ancestors of modern language groups. The breakthrough moment came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, 6 months after the initial discovery. Dr. Okonkwo had been analyzing the longest continuous text found in the site, an inscription covering one entire wall of what appeared to be a council chamber. The text had clear organizational structure, sections separated by specific marker symbols, internal repetitions suggesting parallel statements or emphatic reinforcement. He'd been working on one particular section for weeks, a passage that appeared to be a formal declaration of some kind. He de-identified several key symbols, one that appeared in contexts suggesting time or duration, another that seemed related to building or construction, a third that showed up in references to large groups of people. And then he saw it, the refrain sequence, the 7 symbols that appeared throughout the site, embedded in this text in a context that finally made sense. The symbols translated roughly to those who come after. Not descendants, not future rulers, but literally those who come after, people who would exist later, much later. The text wasn't addressing contemporaries, it was addressing us. Future discoverers. Once Dr. Okonkwo had that key, other pieces fell into place. Symbols he de-identified but could quite understand resolved into meaning. The full sentence translated to something like, "We who built upon the water write this for those who will come after the forgetting." Dr. Okonkwo sat back from his desk, hands shaking. They knew. The Atlanteans knew they were going to be forgotten. They knew civilization would end, and they'd written specifically for whoever came after, whoever rediscovered them. This wasn't just an ancient city. It was a time capsule, a message, a warning. He called Dr. Vasquez immediately. She was on the research vessel, still coordinating dives, still documenting the site. "Helena," he said, "they were talking to us. The entire site. They built it as a message. For us specifically, for whoever found it after civilization reset. What does the message say?" Dr. Okonkwo looked at his translations, at the patterns he de-decoded, at the meaning emerging from symbols carved 11,500 years ago. It says, "Learn from what destroyed us." As Dr. Okonkwo decoded more inscriptions, a narrative emerged. Not the story of Atlantis' glory, not celebrations of kings or accounts of victories. The texts focused obsessively on warnings, on knowledge preservation, on preventing future civilizations from repeating their mistakes. The longest complete text found in the council chamber described what they called the Great Knowing, a period when Atlantean science achieved breakthrough after breakthrough in understanding natural forces. They learned to harness geothermal energy with remarkable efficiency. They built machines that tapped directly into the Earth's thermal layers, providing unlimited power for their cities. The text describes the achievement with technical precision, depth they drilled, temperatures they accessed, energy outputs they achieved. It reads like an engineering manual, detailed and specific, but then the tone shifts. In the 127th year of the Great Knowing, the Earth began to speak back. They noticed increased seismic activity, small earthquakes becoming more frequent, new volcanic vents opening near their geothermal facilities. At first, they dismissed these as coincidence. The Earth was naturally active in their region. They debuilt their civilization in a geologically dynamic area, specifically because it provided access to geothermal resources. But the activity intensified. Earthquakes grew stronger. The ground itself became unstable near their energy extraction sites. Some scientists warned that they were disrupting geological stability. They argued for reducing extraction, for shutting down the most aggressive facilities, for studying the long-term effects before continuing. Others argued that the energy was essential to maintaining their civilization. Millions of people depended on it. Their entire infrastructure was built around it. Stopping wasn't an option. They needed to solve the problems, not abandon the technology. The debate continued for decades while the seismic activity worsened, and then they realized they destabilized the very ground their civilization was built upon. The cracks they created were spreading, connecting, compromising the structural integrity of the landmass itself. "We commanded the fire beneath," the text reads, "but we learned too late that the Earth commands us." They made themselves vulnerable. When catastrophe came, and the texts indicate they knew it was coming, had calculated it astronomically, their civilization couldn't withstand it because they already weakened their own foundation. Another text found in what appeared to be an educational building described their response to the crisis. They formed councils, debated solutions. Some factions wanted to continue developing technology, believing they could engineer their way out of the crisis. Others wanted to return to simpler methods, abandoning dangerous technologies before they caused complete collapse. The debate became political, philosophical, almost religious in its intensity, and while they debated, time ran out. The tone of these texts is remarkable. There is no blame placed on gods or fate, no claims that they were victims of forces beyond their control. They take full responsibility. "We knew what we were doing," one passage states. "We chose power before wisdom. We chose growth before balance. We chose speed before understanding." Another passage, carved deeply into stone in the central chamber, reads, "Let those who find our words know, power without wisdom is the path to ending." Every civilization faces this choice. We chose poorly. We hope you will choose better. These weren't ignorant primitives destroyed by natural disaster. They were sophisticated people who understood exactly what they were doing wrong and couldn't agree on how to stop. The parallel to modern civilization was impossible to ignore. We're having the same debates now, about climate change, about artificial intelligence, about genetic engineering, about technologies developing faster than our ability to predict their long-term effects. We're making the same choice. Continue developing dangerous capabilities because we need them. Hope we can solve the problems they create. Delay difficult decisions, because shutting down isn't an option. Dr. Okonkwo sent his translations to Dr. Vasquez with a simple message. They sound like us. And they did. Reading Atlantean warnings felt like reading contemporary debates about technological risk. The same arguments, the same tensions, the same choice between power and wisdom. The only difference, we could still read their warnings. They couldn't read whatever warnings came before them, because whatever civilization preceded Atlantis had been forgotten completely. Would we learn? Or would we become the next warning that future civilizations might or might not discover in time? The Atlantean texts couldn't answer that. They could only show us what happened when a civilization chose power first and asked questions later. They chose growth over balance, and they sank beneath the ocean, but not all Atlantean knowledge was openly shared. Deep within the sealed chamber, Dr. Vasquez's team found a separate section, text that had been deliberately isolated from the main archives. These weren't public knowledge. These were secrets. The metallic tablets in this section were different, heavier, made from an alloy that resisted corrosion even more effectively than the others, sealed in crystal containers that required specific actions to open. Not locks exactly, but puzzles that only someone with technical knowledge could solve. The Atlanteans had hidden these texts even from themselves. Dr. Okonkwo's translation revealed why. These tablets described research that the Atlantean Council had deemed too dangerous to continue. Technologies they'd developed but chose not to use. Knowledge they considered existential threat. The first set described what they called essence moving, experiments in consciousness transfer. The texts are technical, describing neural mapping, energy patterns associated with awareness, methods for recording, and potentially replicating individual consciousness. They'd apparently achieved limited success, transferring memories between individuals, preserving specific cognitive patterns beyond biological death, but they'd stopped. Deliberately, because they'd seen where it led. Those who could afford consciousness preservation became effectively immortal. A permanent ruling class emerged, accumulating power and knowledge across multiple lifetimes while normal citizens remained mortal. The social division became unbridgeable. The enhanced versus the natural, immortals versus mortals. The council banned the technology, declared it existential threat to social cohesion, and ordered all research destroyed. But they didn't destroy it. They sealed it in the archive, with detailed technical specifications, apparently trusting that future civilizations would be wise enough not to use it, or hoping that if they did use it, they'd at least benefit from Atlantean experience. The second set of tablets described atomic understanding. The language is technical, using symbols. Dr. Okonkwo identified as representing matter, energy, structure, transformation. They describe particles too small to see, forces that bind matter together, methods for unmaking that binding. They'd understood nuclear fission, possibly fusion, and they'd built weapons. The tablets don't celebrate these weapons. They describe them with horror, documenting tests that unmade entire islands, that created fire that consumed water itself, that left regions poisoned for generations. The weapons were never used in war. They were tested, understood, and then banned. The council ordered them dismantled, and their principles sealed in the Forbidden Archive. The third category was most cryptic, texts about pattern recognition. These described systems for collecting information about individuals, their behaviors, their choices, their relationships, and using that information to predict future actions with frightening accuracy. They'd apparently built some kind of predictive social system that could forecast individual behavior, identify dissidents before they acted, and shape society through perfect information. The texts describe political conflicts around this technology. Some factions argued it was necessary for social stability. Others insisted it was tyranny, that freedom required some degree of unpredictability, that perfect control was worse than chaos. The council eventually banned it, but the texts suggest some faction defied the ban and took the technology with them when they fled, meaning this particular danger might have survived through refugee populations, passed down through whatever groups escaped the cataclysm. The Forbidden Archive ended with a direct statement carved in larger symbols than the rest of the text. We list these horrors not to inspire their recreation, but to warn. The power to reshape reality is also the power to end it. May those who read this have wisdom we lacked. The underwater city was extraordinary, but it raised a troubling question. Where did Atlantis come from? Advanced civilizations don't appear suddenly. They develop gradually: agriculture, then villages, then towns, then cities, then sophisticated urban centers. Archaeology documents this progression everywhere: Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, China. But Atlantis appeared to have no precursor stages, no development period, just sudden sophistication, unless it wasn't the beginning, unless it was part of something larger. Dr. Vasquez's team analyzed the artifacts recovered from the site, looking for clues about trade networks, resource origins, cultural connections. What they found suggested Atlantis wasn't isolated. The stones used in construction came from multiple geological sources. Some were local, quarried from the island itself. but others originated from regions we now call Egypt, South America, and Southeast Asia. Stones weighing hundreds of tons, transported thousands of miles. This implied either trade networks spanning the globe, or that different regions were all part of the same civilization, colonies perhaps of a single culture. More significantly, the mathematical systems used in Atlantean astronomical calculations showed remarkable similarities to those found in ancient Sumerian tablets and Mayan calendars. These cultures supposedly had no contact. They existed continents apart, separated by oceans that conventional history says they could T-cross. Yet they used similar mathematical frameworks, similar astronomical calculations, similar calendar systems. Coincidence or connection? Dr. Vasquez began examining other archaeological mysteries with new perspective. Ancient Egypt appeared suddenly around 3100 BCE with sophisticated mathematics, astronomy, and architecture. No clear developmental stages, just the sudden emergence of pyramid building, complex hieroglyphics, and advanced engineering. Sumeria emerged around the same time with cuneiform writing, ziggurats, irrigation systems, and detailed astronomical records. Again, seemingly without developmental precursors. The Indus Valley Civilization appeared around 3300 BCE with planned cities, standardized weights and measures, and sophisticated drainage systems. All of these civilizations emerged within a few centuries of each other, all showing similar levels of sophistication, all lacking clear earlier stages of development. Standard archaeology explains this as parallel evolution, similar problems leading to similar solutions, human ingenuity independently discovering similar techniques. But what if the real explanation was simpler and stranger? What if these weren't independent developments, but successor civilizations? What if, around 11,500 years ago, a global cataclysm destroyed an earlier interconnected civilization, and the survivors scattered to different regions, carrying fragments of knowledge that they used to rebuild in their new locations? This would explain the sudden appearance of sophistication. These weren't primitives slowly inventing civilization. They were survivors rebuilding from memory, carrying knowledge from a previous iteration. It would explain the similarities, not coincidence but shared origin. It would explain the gaps. They didn't have complete knowledge. They had what they could remember, what they could preserve, fragments of a larger whole. The underwater city showed signs of sudden catastrophic abandonment. Buildings contained personal items left in place. No gradual decline, no slow evacuation. Just rapid departure. Geological evidence supported massive flooding. The depth and sediment patterns indicated the city had been above water and then rapidly submerged. Not gradual sea level rise, but catastrophic inundation. The Atlanteans had known it was coming. Their astronomical calculations had predicted it, but they could escape it. Some must have fled before the end, taken ships, sailed to distant lands, carried what knowledge they could. And those survivors would have found primitive human populations, hunter-gatherers, early agriculturalists, and begun teaching them, not conquering. Teaching, showing them how to farm more efficiently, how to build permanent structures, how to track the stars, how to organize into complex societies. To those primitive populations, the survivors would have seemed like gods, beings with impossible knowledge, teaching arts and sciences that transformed their world. Every ancient culture has myths of such teachers. The Egyptian Thoth, the Sumerian Oannes, the Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl. What if these weren't gods or myths, but memories? Memories of Atlantean survivors, teaching civilization to the people who would come after. Atlantis wasn't alone. It was the center of a global network. And when it fell, that network didn't entirely die. It transformed, scattered, rebuilt. We are their descendants, all of us. If Atlantis was part of a global civilization, we should find evidence of that network elsewhere. And when researchers looked at existing archaeological sites with fresh perspective, they found patterns that had been hiding in plain sight. Consider the Great Pyramid of Giza. It is more than just impressive architecture. It is mathematics encoded in stone. The pyramid, S base perimeter divided by twice its height, equals pi 3.14159 to an accuracy of 0.05%. The ratio of the pyramid, S height to half its base length, equals phi 1.618. The golden ratio that appears throughout nature and art. The pyramid, S internal chambers, align precisely with cardinal directions, its descending passage points at the pole star, its shafts align with specific stars in the Orion constellation. This isn't decoration. This is intentional encoding of mathematical and astronomical knowledge in permanent stone form. Why would Bronze Age Egyptians, supposedly just learning mathematics, encode advanced constants they shouldn't have known about? Unless they were rebuilding from knowledge they de-inherited, unless they were preserving information from a previous civilization, encoding it in the most permanent structure they could build. Move to South America. Puma Punku, in Bolivia. The ruins feature H-shaped stone, blocks weighing over 100 tons, cut with precision that suggests metal tools. But the culture that built it supposedly hadn't developed metallurgy yet. The blocks fit together so perfectly that a knife blade can fit between them. No mortar, just stone on stone with microscopic tolerances. Modern construction with cranes and laser-guided cutting tools can barely match this precision. Yet conventional archaeology dates Puma Punku to around 500 CE, claiming it was built by people using stone hammers and copper chisels. How? How did they achieve precision we can barely replicate with modern technology, using tools that shouldn't be capable of it? Unless they weren't starting from scratch. Unless they were copying techniques they de-learned from predecessors. Lebanon. Baalbek. The Temple of Jupiter sits on a foundation of megalithic stones, including blocks weighing over 800 tons, the largest precisely cut stones in the world. Moving an 800-ton stone requires equipment that didn't exist in Roman times. Even modern cranes strain to lift such weight. The engineering required to position these blocks with precision is extraordinary. Yet there they are, moved, positioned, fitted together. The Romans built on top of these foundations, but they didn't build the foundations themselves. They acknowledged that these massive stones predated their civilization. Who built the foundation when and how? Turkey, Göbekli Tepe. Discovered in 1994, carbon, dated to 11,500 years ago, the exact time frame when Atlantis was destroyed. Massive stone pillars arranged in circles, covered with sophisticated carved reliefs of animals and astronomical symbols, evidence of organized labor, complex planning, and abstract symbolic thought. This was built by hunter-gatherers, supposedly, people who didn't have agriculture, didn't have cities, didn't have complex social organization, yet somehow they organized hundreds of workers, carved multi-ton pillars, transported them to the site, and erected them with astronomical alignments, all before they de-invented farming, unless they weren't hunter-gatherers, unless they were survivors with knowledge, rebuilding in a world that had collapsed around them. The pattern repeats across the globe. Easter Island, Moai statues, Stonehenge, precision alignments. The underwater structures off the coast of Japan, the Nazca lines in Peru. All of them show capabilities that seem impossible for their supposed era. All of them encode astronomical or mathematical knowledge. All of them suggest organization and sophistication that conventional chronology says shouldn't exist. What if conventional chronology is wrong? What if these aren't humanity's first achievements but remnants of a second attempt? What if the first attempt, the first civilization, of which Atlantis was a major city, achieved far more than we can currently imagine, then collapsed so thoroughly that only fragments remained, the survivors scattered? They taught primitive populations what they could remember. Those populations built megalithic structures, encoding the knowledge they'd received, preserving it in stone for future generations. Not because they were primitive people reaching beyond their capabilities, but because they were inheritors of knowledge, doing their best to preserve what they'd been taught before it was forgotten completely. The megalithic sites aren't mysteries, they're archives. Libraries built in stone, encoding knowledge from a civilization that knew it was ending. They're messages from the past, waiting for us to remember how to read them. And the message they contain is simple. We were here. We achieved great things. We fell. Don't repeat our mistakes. Learn, remember, build better. Every culture remembers the flood, not similar floods. The same flood. The specificity is striking. When you read flood myths from cultures worldwide, cultures that supposedly had no contact, the descriptions match in impossible ways. The biblical story of Noah. God warns of coming flood. Noah builds an ark. Waters rise and cover the entire earth. Only a small group survives. They preserve knowledge and species. After the flood, they rebuild civilization. The Sumerian epic of Gilgamesh, written centuries before the Bible, gods warn Utnapishtim of coming flood. He builds a boat. Waters rise and destroy everything. His family and animals survive. After the flood, they repopulate the earth. Hindu texts describe Manu being warned by a fish about a great deluge. He builds a boat. The flood destroys all civilization. He and 7 sages survive with seeds and knowledge to restart the world. Greek mythology, Zeus sends a flood to destroy humanity. Deucalion and Pyrrha build a chest and float to safety. After 9 days, the waters recede. They repopulate the earth. Chinese legends, a great flood covers the earth. Gun and then his son Yu work for decades to control the waters through massive engineering projects. Native American tribes across both continents have flood stories, the Algonquin, the Hopi, the Aztecs. Waters rise, suddenly most people die. A few survive on mountains or in boats. They descend to rebuild. Aboriginal Australian stories describe a time when the sea rose rapidly, drowning coastal lands and forcing people to flee inland. Dozens more from cultures across Africa, Asia, the Pacific Islands, South America. Standard anthropology explains these as natural psychological patterns. Humans fear water. Local flooding events traumatize populations. These experiences get encoded into mythology. But that explanation doesn't account for the specifics. These aren't just big flood stories. They describe the same event. Waters rising globally, entire civilizations destroyed. Only a small group of survivors, knowledge intentionally preserved, civilization restarted from scratch. The details are too consistent for independent invention, and the timeline matches. Many of these myths, when they include chronological information, place the flood around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, exactly when Atlantis fell, exactly when Göbekli Tepe was built, exactly when geological evidence shows massive climate change and catastrophic flooding. The Younger Dryas period, 12,800 to 11,600 years ago, marks a time of rapid climate shifts. Temperatures dropped dramatically, then rose equally quickly. Ice sheets melted. Sea levels rose by hundreds of feet. Some scientists believe these changes were triggered by a cosmic impact, a comet or asteroid striking Earth, causing immediate devastation and triggering climate chaos. The timing matches perfectly with Atlantean texts, describing astronomical calculations, showing an incoming impactor, geological disruptions, and inevitable catastrophe. The flood myths aren't myths, they re-memories. Cultural memories of the day the world ended, the day an advanced global civilization collapsed, the day the survivors fled to high ground while coastal cities drowned beneath rising waters. 500 generations of humans have passed down these stories. The details degraded over time, specific names changed, local cultural elements were added, the survivors became gods or heroes rather than simply humans with knowledge. But the core truth persisted. Once there was a great flood. Once civilization was destroyed. Once we had to begin again. Every human alive today carries genetic ancestry from those survivors. We are all descendants of the people who lived through that catastrophe, who preserved what they could, who taught their children to remember. The myths are our inheritance, our deepest cultural memory, and they tell us something crucial. This has happened before. Advanced civilization isn't guaranteed. Progress isn't inevitable. We can fall, we can forget, we can lose everything we've built, but we can also preserve, we can teach. We can ensure that some knowledge survives, so that after the collapse, rebuilding is possible. The Atlanteans understood this. That is why they built their archive. That is why they sealed knowledge in chambers beneath the ocean, carved warnings into stone, encoded information in structures designed to outlast any disaster. They knew the flood was coming. They couldn't stop it, but they could prepare for what came after. The myths tell us the flood happened. The archaeological evidence confirms it. The Atlantean texts explain it. And now we face a question. Are we headed for another one? Not necessarily a water flood, but some kind of collapse, some kind of reset, climate change, nuclear war, artificial intelligence, biological catastrophe, civilizational complexity exceeding our ability to manage it. The specific threat might differ. The result could be the same. And if it comes, will we be like the Atlanteans, prepared to preserve knowledge for whoever comes after, or will we be caught unprepared, losing everything, forcing our descendants to rebuild from nothing? The flood myths are warnings, reminders, proof that we've lost everything before, and that if we're not careful, we could lose it again. The Atlanteans knew it was coming. This wasn't primitive superstition or divine prophecy. This was calculation. The astronomical instruments found in the sealed chamber prove it. The star maps, the planetary motion calculations, the devices for tracking celestial movements with precision that rivals modern equipment. They understood astronomy in ways that should be impossible for their era. The crystal sphere, the most sophisticated device recovered from the site, turns out to be far more than a simple star map. When researchers expose it to different wavelengths of light, it reveals different layers of information. Visible light shows star positions. Ultraviolet reveals planetary orbits. Infrared shows what appear to be trajectory calculations for objects moving through the solar system. It is a multi-dimensional astronomical computer encoded in crystal structure, and what it calculates is catastrophe. The Atlantean texts describe what they called the Great Cycle, a 26,000-year pattern of celestial movements that affects Earth's climate and geological stability. Modern astronomy knows this as precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that causes the position of the stars to shift gradually over millennia. But the Atlantean understanding went deeper. They de-tracked this cycle not just through observation but through geological evidence. They developed methods for reading climate history in ice cores. Yes, they understood ice core dating. They studied sediment layers, tree rings, and astronomical positions preserved in ancient stone structures. They reconstructed climate patterns going back hundreds of thousands of years. And they found a troubling pattern every 12,000 to 13,000 years: catastrophe. The evidence is in the geological record: mass extinction events, rapid climate changes, flooding, cosmic impact markers. These weren't random, they were cyclical, predictable. The Great Cycle brought Earth through regions of space with higher concentrations of comets and asteroids. At certain points in the cycle, impact probability increased dramatically. The Atlanteans had calculated that their era was approaching one of these danger points. They detected increased meteor activity, unusual gravitational perturbations suggesting massive objects in the outer solar system, cometary fragments on trajectories that could intersect Earth's orbit. They could tell exactly when impact would occur, not down to the day or year, but they could say with certainty, soon, within a few generations. Catastrophe was inevitable. The texts describe the debates this knowledge triggered. Some wanted to build deep underground shelters hoping to survive the impact and its aftermath. Others wanted to attempt space evacuation. Yes, they discussed this. They understood orbital mechanics, knew what would be required to leave Earth's gravity. They didn't have the technology, but they were researching it. Most believed neither shelter nor evacuation was realistic. They chose a third path: preservation. If they could save their civilization, they would save their knowledge. They would ensure that whatever came after, whoever survived, whoever eventually evolved or migrated into the regions they occupied, would have access to what they learned. They would defeat death not by surviving it, but by teaching across it. The sealed chamber, the encoded monuments, the knowledge embedded in genetic and cultural patterns. These were their answers to inevitable catastrophe. They could stop the asteroid, but they could speak to the future. They could warn us. And the warning is clear. The cycle continues. The same celestial mechanics that brought catastrophe to them will eventually bring it again. Maybe not in our lifetimes, maybe not for thousands of years, but it will come. The question is whether we'll be ready, whether we'll have developed enough to deflect asteroids, to modify orbits, to protect ourselves from cosmic threats, or whether we'll repeat Atlantis's fate, sophisticated enough to predict our doom, not advanced enough to prevent it. The Atlanteans achieved remarkable things, but they ran out of time. They'd spent too much energy on dangerous technologies, geothermal extraction that destabilized their landmass, social conflicts that divided their civilization, experiments with consciousness and atomic forces that distracted from the real threat. When the impact came, they were vulnerable, divided, unprepared. The astronomical catastrophe didn't have to destroy them completely, but their own choices had weakened them enough that they couldn't survive it. The warning isn't just asteroid impacts happen. The warning is civilizations that focus on power instead of wisdom, on immediate gain instead of long-term resilience, on technological capability instead of social cohesion. Those civilizations don't survive. The stars are predictable, human choices aren't. The Atlanteans could calculate celestial mechanics perfectly. They couldn't solve their own divisions, and those divisions killed them more surely than any asteroid could have. Once they knew catastrophe was inevitable, the Atlantean Council implemented what the texts call the preservation protocols. This wasn't desperation. This was systematic planning for civilizational continuity. First, physical archives. The underwater city we discovered wasn't their last city. It was deliberately chosen as an archive site. The texts explain their reasoning. Surface structures erode, burn, get destroyed by human conflict. Underground sites collapse during seismic events. But deep, ocean locations below storm depth, protected by sediment, could preserve for 100,000 years or more. They built multiple such sites. The texts reference 6 archive locations in total, each in geologically stable, deep ocean regions, each containing sealed chambers with essential knowledge. We found one. 5 more wait somewhere beneath the waves. The engineering required to build an air-tight chamber that would remain sealed for over 11,000 years is extraordinary. They used materials we're still trying to understand. Alloys that resist corrosion, sealants that remain flexible across millennia, construction techniques that account for geological shifts and sediment accumulation. They built it to last, and it did. Second, encoded monuments. They couldn't guarantee that future civilizations would have the technology to explore ocean depths. So they also encoded knowledge in surface structures. Massive stone monuments positioned with astronomical alignments, constructed with mathematical constants embedded in their dimensions. These monuments would survive catastrophe. Stone outlasts everything. And if future civilizations achieved sufficient mathematical and astronomical knowledge, they de-recognize the encoding. The structures would essentially wake up as the viewers became sophisticated enough to understand them. The Great Pyramid with its pi and phi ratios, Stonehenge with its eclipse predictions, Göbekli Tepe with its astronomical alignments. These weren't built by the civilization's archaeologists credit them to. They were built by Atlanteans, or built by survivors following Atlantean knowledge, specifically to preserve information across catastrophic breaks in civilization. Third, genetic encoding. This is where the preservation protocols become truly extraordinary. The texts describe their understanding of what we call DNA. They recognized that biological systems contain inherited information, that traits pass from parent to child through physical structures too small to see, and they believed they developed methods to encode knowledge directly into genetic sequences, not just physical traits, but information, behavioral patterns, cognitive capabilities, memories potentially. The texts are technical here, difficult to translate with certainty, but they describe selecting populations with specific cognitive traits, pattern recognition, spatial reasoning, mathematical intuition, and deliberately ensuring those traits propagated through descendants. They were engineering genetic legacy, ensuring that the humans who came after would have innate capabilities that would help them rediscover lost knowledge. Every human alive today might carry fragments of Atlantean genetic engineering. Our unusual cognitive abilities, our capacity for abstract reasoning, our mathematical intuition, our drive to understand the cosmos. These might not be random evolutionary developments. They might be gifts, deliberately encoded, designed to awaken when needed. Fourth, cultural transmission. They sent emissaries, small groups with essential knowledge, tasked with traveling to distant regions and teaching primitive populations the basics of civilization. Not conquerors, teachers. Civilization seeds. These groups would become the mysterious culture bearers of ancient mythology, the gods who taught agriculture, astronomy, writing, mathematics. They weren't gods. They were Atlanteans, carrying fragments of knowledge, trying to ensure civilization would rebuild after the catastrophe. Fifth, the Forbidden Archive. Not all knowledge should be preserved, they decided. Some technologies were too dangerous. Some discoveries led inevitably to catastrophe. But complete destruction seemed wrong too. Future civilizations might be wiser. They might need this knowledge to face challenges the Atlanteans couldn't imagine, so they sealed it, preserved it, but hidden. protected by puzzles that only sufficiently advanced minds could solve. If we re-smart enough to open the archive, we re-hopefully smart enough to use its contents responsibly. If not, if we open it with insufficient wisdom, we repeat their mistakes. The choice is ours. The preservation protocols represent something profound, a civilization accepting its own death with grace, focusing its remaining time not on desperate survival attempts, but on ensuring that knowledge would survive even if they didn't. They chose civilization over their civilization. They chose the future over themselves, and because they did, we exist. We inherited their legacy. We're the recipients of the most ambitious preservation effort in human history. Now the question is, what will we do with it? Will we learn? Will we grow? Will we achieve what they couldn't? Civilization that sustains rather than destroys, wisdom that matches capability, choices that prioritize future over present? Or will we need to implement our own preservation protocols, preparing for the catastrophe? Our choices create. The answer is being written now, in our choices, in our wisdom or lack thereof, in whether we remember what Atlantis tried so desperately to teach us. The Forbidden Archive contains specific technical knowledge the Atlantean Council deemed too dangerous to use. Understanding what they feared helps us recognize similar dangers we face now. First, Earth-breaking technologies, the geothermal extraction methods that destabilize their civilization. The texts provide detailed specifications, depths, pressures, extraction rates, energy outputs. They weren't wrong to develop this technology. The principle is sound. Geothermal energy is clean, abundant, renewable, but they developed it too aggressively without sufficient long-term study. They optimized for energy output without understanding cumulative geological impacts. The technology itself wasn't evil. The speed and scale of deployment was the problem. They created structural weaknesses that accumulated invisibly over decades. By the time they recognized the danger, the damage was irreversible. Modern civilization is pursuing similar technologies: fracking, deep geothermal wells, mining operations that destabilize subsurface structures. We're making the same choice: prioritize immediate energy needs, assume we can manage long-term consequences, proceed before completing safety research. The Atlantean warning: sometimes consequences accumulate invisibly until catastrophic failure becomes inevitable. Just because technology works initially doesn't mean it is safe long-term. Second, Essence Technologies, their research into consciousness manipulation, memory transfer, potential immortality. The technical details are fascinating. They'd mapped neural patterns with precision, understood how memories encode physically, developed methods for recording and potentially replaying conscious experiences. But they'd seen where it led: inequality that couldn't be bridged. Those who could afford consciousness preservation became effectively immortal. They accumulated power, wealth, and knowledge across lifetimes. They became a separate class, fundamentally different from ordinary mortals. Society fractured: the enhanced versus the natural, the immortals versus the dying. Social cohesion collapsed. They banned the technology, recognizing that some capabilities threaten the equality necessary for stable civilization. Modern civilization is approaching similar capabilities: neural interfaces, brain-computer integration, potential consciousness uploading, life extension technologies. We're having the same debates: who gets access? What happens to inequality when some people can enhance cognition or extend life indefinitely? Does freedom include the right to be unenhanced? The Atlantean answer: these technologies threaten the social contract. They create divisions that civilizations can't survive. Whether we agree or not, we face the same choice they did. Third, pattern recognition systems. Technologies for collecting detailed information about individuals and using it to predict behavior, identify threats, shape social outcomes. They'd built sophisticated systems, what we'd now call surveillance states, combined with predictive analytics and behavioral manipulation. The systems were effective. They could identify problems before they manifested. They could optimize social outcomes. They could ensure stability. But the cost was freedom. Perfect prediction requires perfect knowledge. Perfect knowledge requires total surveillance. Total surveillance is incompatible with human dignity. Some factions argued this was acceptable. Safety requires giving up some freedom. Social optimization justifies some loss of privacy. Other factions argued this was tyranny. That unpredictability is essential to freedom. That humans need the capacity to surprise, to change, to be more than the sum of their patterns. The council eventually banned the technology. but some faction defied the ban and took it with them when they fled. Modern civilization has built similar systems. Social media algorithms that predict and manipulate behavior, surveillance technologies that track everything, data collection that enables unprecedented knowledge of individual patterns. We're having the same debates: security versus privacy, optimization versus freedom, whether perfect prediction is desirable, even if achievable. The Atlantean texts don't provide easy answers. They banned these technologies, but some survived anyway. The dangers they feared may have manifested in successor civilizations. What they provide is warning. These technologies are more dangerous than they appear. They threaten things more fundamental than physical safety. They threaten the essence of what makes us human. The choice to develop or restrict them isn't just technical. It is existential. And it is a choice every advanced civilization must make. The Atlanteans made their choice. It may or may not have been the right one. Now we make ours, and future civilizations will judge whether we chose wisely. Every answer raises new questions. We know what Atlantis achieved. We know how they fell. We know what they tried to preserve. But where did they come from? Advanced civilizations don't appear from nothing. They develop. They evolve. They build on foundations laid by previous generations. Yet Atlantis appears in the archaeological record fully formed, sophisticated from the beginning. No primitive stages. No gradual development. This troubled Dr. Vasquez as she studied the decoded texts, and then she found references to something older, the earliest inscriptions in the underwater city. Those found in what appear to be the oldest structures, the foundational buildings upon which later construction was built. These texts mention predecessors. They call them the first teachers. In some translations, the progenitors, not gods. The language is explicit about this. Not supernatural beings, not aliens, just humans. Earlier humans, people who had achieved knowledge first. The texts describe how the first teachers came to the region that would become Atlantis. They found human populations living there. Hunter-gatherers, small tribal groups, people without cities or agriculture or written language. And the first teachers began to teach. They taught agriculture, which crops to plant, how to irrigate, how to store surplus. They taught astronomy, how to track the stars, how to predict seasons, how to calculate time. They taught mathematics, geometry, algebra, the relationships between numbers that govern natural patterns. They taught metallurgy, how to find ore, how to smelt metal, how to forge tools and weapons. They taught architecture, how to quarry stone, how to construct stable buildings, how to design cities. Essentially, they started civilization. The texts are clear. The first teachers weren't conquerors. They didn't enslave or dominate. They taught because they wanted knowledge to continue, to spread, to survive beyond their own time. But here is what troubles researchers. The texts date the first teachers to approximately 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. That is 3,000 to 8,000 years before Atlantis fell, which means 14,500 to 19,500 years before present. We were talking about advanced human civilization, existing 20,000 years ago, when conventional archaeology says humans were just beginning to develop agriculture, when we were supposedly thousands of years away from cities, writing, or sophisticated technology. The texts don't provide complete information about the first teachers. The Atlanteans themselves didn't know everything. Their knowledge of their own origins was fragmentary, passed down through generations, partially forgotten, but certain details emerge. The first teachers came from somewhere else. They weren't native to the Atlantic region. They were refugees, apparently fleeing something. The texts describe them as coming from lands of endless ice and mountains that touched the sky, cold regions, high altitude, somewhere that was becoming uninhabitable. They arrived in the warmer Atlantic region and found conditions suitable for rebuilding. They had knowledge, but had lost most of their technology in whatever catastrophe they fled. So they started again, and this time they shared what they knew. They taught the local populations everything they could, accelerating their development from hunter-gatherers to civilization in just a few generations. Those populations became the Atlanteans, and Atlantis itself became a second-generation civilization, inheritors of knowledge from an even older source, which means we're not the second attempt at human civilization. We're at least the third, possibly the fourth or fifth. If the first teachers were themselves inheritors of knowledge from even earlier sources, the timeline becomes vertiginous. How far back does it go? How many times has humanity achieved advancement only to fall? How many times have we forgotten and remembered, built and destroyed, learned and lost? Dr. Vasquez sat with these questions for months. The implications were overwhelming. History as we know it, the comfortable narrative of steady progress from primitive ancestors to modern sophistication, that might be completely wrong. We might be living in a cycle, building on ruins we don't recognize, rediscovering knowledge that was never truly lost, just forgotten. The texts suggest the first teachers understood this. They knew they weren't the first either. They'd inherited knowledge from their own predecessors. It is knowledge all the way down. Civilizations teaching civilizations across catastrophes, across forgetting, across time spans so vast that only fragments remain. We think we're discovering new things. Maybe we're just remembering old things. We think we're the pinnacle of human achievement. Maybe we're just another iteration in an endless cycle. The first teachers left questions Atlantis couldn't answer, and Atlantis left those questions for us. Where did the first teachers come from? How many cycles preceded them? And most troubling, if this has happened before, will it happen again? Will we be the teachers to whatever comes after us, or will we be the warning? One detail in the texts caught everyone. Attention, lands of endless ice. Where could the first teachers have come from? What region fits the description? Cold, high altitude, becoming uninhabitable around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago. The answer seemed impossible. But the evidence kept pointing to the same place, Antarctica. Modern Antarctica is a frozen wasteland, uninhabitable, buried under ice sheets miles thick. The idea of ancient civilization there seems absurd. But Antarctica wasn't always frozen. Geological evidence confirms that Antarctica's climate has changed dramatically over deep time. Around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, the continent was transitioning from a period of relative warmth to the deep freeze it experiences now. Parts of the coastline were ice, free. Some interior valleys might have been habitable. It wasn't tropical, but it wasn't the lifeless deep freeze it is today. If humans lived there during that transitional period, they would have been forced to migrate as encroaching ice made their homeland uninhabitable. They would have been refugees from lands of endless ice. But the evidence goes beyond climate patterns. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis created a map of the world. The map still exists, housed in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, and it shows Antarctica. Not Antarctica as we know it today, buried under ice, roughly circular, featureless. The Piri Reis map shows Antarctica's coastline as it would appear without ice, with rivers, with detailed geographic features. Piri Reis noted on the map that he decompiled it from older source maps, some dating to the time of Alexander the Great or earlier. He was copying ancient knowledge. How did ancient mapmakers know what Antarctica looked like beneath the ice? How did they map coastlines that have been frozen for thousands of years, unless someone mapped it when it was still visible, when it was still habitable? The Piri Reis map is alone. Other ancient maps show similar knowledge. The Orontius Phineas map of 1531, the Mercator map of 1569, all showing Antarctic features that shouldn't have been known. Standard cartography dismisses these as coincidence, artistic fancy, medieval mapmakers guessing. But the accuracy is troubling. These aren't vague approximations. They redetailed coastlines that match modern surveys of sub-ice topography. The Atlantean texts describe the first teachers' homeland as having mountains, valleys, and coastal regions. Modern ice-penetrating radar has revealed that Antarctica beneath the ice has exactly such geography: mountain ranges, valley systems, coastlines. If the first teachers came from Antarctica 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, they would have been fleeing the very climate change that was burying their civilization under ice. They would have taken boats. The texts confirm the first teachers had advanced maritime technology and sailed north to warmer regions. They would have carried what knowledge they could, but left behind their infrastructure, their cities, their archives, all of which would now be under 2 miles of ice, protected, preserved, frozen in time. If this hypothesis is correct, the most important archaeological sites in human history aren't in Egypt or Mesopotamia, or even underwater in the Atlantic. They in Antarctica, under the ice, waiting. Modern technology has begun to penetrate that ice with radar and satellite imaging, and they found anomalies, geometric patterns detected beneath the ice sheets, regular formations that look artificial, structures that don't match natural geological processes. Most scientists dismiss these as ice formations, radar artifacts, or natural rock structures being misinterpreted. But some researchers have noticed that these anomalies appear in the exact regions where Antarctica would have been most habitable during the last ice age. The regions where, if humans had lived there, they would have built cities. Dr. Vasquez compiled all the evidence, the Atlantean texts, the ancient maps, the geological data, the satellite anomalies into a preliminary report. Her conclusion, the first teachers likely originated in Antarctica. Their homeland became uninhabitable due to advancing ice. They migrated north, carrying advanced knowledge. They found populations in the Atlantic region and taught them, essentially creating Atlantis. The report was met with skepticism, of course. Antarctica theories have been contaminated by too many pseudo-scientific claims. Mainstream archaeology dismisses them reflexively, but de Vasquez noted one undeniable fact. If the hypothesis is correct, the implications are staggering. Because if the first teachers' archives still exist under Antarctic ice, if their cities, their libraries, their technologies are preserved in frozen time capsules, then we haven't even begun to understand how advanced ancient humans truly were. Atlantis might be just the middle chapter in a much longer story. A story that began in ice, migrated through water, and ends. Where, with us, or with whoever comes after us? The answer might be frozen beneath 2 miles of ice, waiting for technology advanced enough to retrieve it, waiting for humans curious enough to look, waiting for a civilization wise enough to learn from what it finds. But there is another kind of evidence, not in ruins or texts, in us. In our very biology, modern human genetics reveals puzzles that conventional evolution struggles to explain. First puzzle, we appeared suddenly, anatomically modern humans, people who looked like us, with our bone structure, our brain capacity, our capabilities, emerged around 300,000 years ago. But we didn't evolve gradually from archaic humans. We appeared relatively suddenly in the fossil record, significantly different from what came before. The transition from archaic to modern humans shows few intermediate forms. We were very different from Homo erectus, from Neanderthals, from other hominids that preceded us. It is almost like someone redesigned humans, quickly, deliberately. Second puzzle, the population bottleneck. Genetic diversity studies indicate that human populations crashed dramatically around 70,000 years ago. Our numbers dropped to perhaps 10,000 individuals or fewer, a near extinction event. We don't know what caused it, climate, disease, catastrophe. But humanity almost ended. Only a small population survived, and everyone alive today descends from those survivors. What if that bottleneck wasn't random? What if it was the first great catastrophe? The event that destroyed the first teachers, civilization, leaving only remnants who fled to other regions. Third puzzle, unknown genetic admixture. Recent studies have identified genetic segments in modern humans that don't trace clearly to African origins. DNA that suggests interbreeding with unknown archaic populations. Not Neanderthals, not Denisovans, but something else. Where did these genetic contributions come from? Who were these unknown ancestors? What if they were the first teachers, a separate human lineage that had achieved advancement before Homo sapiens did, then deliberately interbred with larger populations? The Atlantean texts describe this explicitly. They say the first teachers joined bloodlines with the populations they taught. They didn't just share knowledge culturally, they shared it genetically. They believed certain cognitive traits could be inherited. They deliberately ensured those traits propagated through descendants. This would explain humanity's unusual cognitive capabilities. We were incredibly weird as a species. Our brains are far more complex than survival requires. Our capacity for abstract reasoning, for mathematics, for language, for artistic expression, these exceed what natural selection for hunter-gatherer survival would produce. Other intelligent species, dolphins, elephants, great apes, are smart, but they re not like us. They don't build civilizations. They don't develop writing and mathematics. They don't look at stars and wonder. Why are we different? Why did we develop capabilities so far beyond what our ecological niche required? Maybe we didn't develop them. Maybe we inherited them. Maybe the first teachers were already cognitively advanced, already possessed the mental architecture for civilization, and when they interbred with existing human populations, They passed those capabilities forward. Every human alive today might carry genetic fragments from the first teachers. Not much. Most of our DNA is from the populations they taught. But enough. The crucial pieces, the cognitive tools that make civilization possible. This reframes human history entirely. We re-not the first human lineage to achieve sophistication. We re-inheritors. We carry the genetic legacy of predecessors who achieved advancement first, then deliberately ensured their capabilities would persist through descendants. Dr. Okonkwo, studying the genetic references in Atlantean texts, reached a stunning conclusion. We re-not discovering new things. We re-remembering old things. Our capacity for mathematics, for astronomy, for building civilizations, these were gifts, encoded in our genes by ancestors who wanted us to succeed. The implications are profound. We think human progress is us conquering nature, us ascending from primitive origins to sophisticated capability. But maybe we re-just living up to potential that was given to us. Maybe we re-just expressing what was always encoded in our genes, waiting for the right conditions to manifest. Maybe the first teachers looked at primitive humans and saw not what we were, but what we could become. They didn't enslave or conquer. They elevated, they shared. They ensured their legacy would live in us, whether we remembered them or not. And now, 20,000 years later, we refinding their messages, decoding their warnings, discovering that we re-not alone in time. We reconnected to them through genetics, through inherited memory, through the very capabilities that make us human. They gave us the tools to rediscover them. And now that we have, the question is, what will we do with what they left us? The most controversial claim in the Atlantean archive isn't about what they built or what destroyed them. It is about how they believed memory works. Modern science understands memory as neurological, patterns of connections between brain cells, chemical and electrical signals that encode experience. But the Atlantean texts describe something different, something that sounds impossible until you examine the evidence. They believed memory could exist outside biological systems, that consciousness and information could be encoded in physical substrates beyond neurons. Specifically, in crystalline structures and precisely arranged stone, the sealed chamber contained dozens of crystal objects. The texts describe these as memory keepers, devices for storing not just data, but experiential memory, the subjective feeling of experiences. Modern technology uses crystals for information storage, quartz crystals in computer chips, synthetic sapphires in hard drives. The principle is sound. Crystalline structures can maintain precise arrangements of atoms, and those arrangements can represent information. But the Atlanteans apparently took this further. They discovered that certain crystals, when subjected to specific electromagnetic frequencies, could encode and retrieve complex information with density far exceeding modern technology. The crystal sphere that projects star maps might not just be a data storage device. It might contain actual recorded experiences, what it felt like to observe those stars, to make those calculations, to understand those celestial patterns. We don't yet have the technology to decode such information, but the Atlantean texts are explicit. These crystals contain recorded consciousness, preserved experiences, memories that can be played back, if you know how. And then there is stone, the megalithic structures worldwide, Stonehenge, the Great Pyramid, Göbekli Tepe, thousands of others. The Atlantean texts suggest these aren't just monuments or calendars, they re-memory storage devices. The precise arrangements of stones, their compositions, their alignments. These encode information in the relationships between elements, not in any single stone, but in the system as a whole. It sounds mystical. But modern physics has discovered that all matter retains information about its history at quantum levels. Particles remember states they've been in. Systems maintain information about their past configurations. Physicists call this quantum memory or quantum information. The Atlanteans may have discovered how to deliberately encode information into such systems. They arranged stones with mathematical precision, positioned them with astronomical alignments, chose specific compositions, all to create physical structures that contain encoded knowledge. Knowledge that persists as long as the stones remain in position. The megalithic sites aren't ruins of primitive cultures. They re-sophisticated information storage systems, built to outlast any catastrophe, encoding knowledge in the most permanent form possible. Dr. Vasquez stood at Stonehenge 3 months after translating these texts. She looked at the ancient stones with new eyes. What if each stone's position encodes mathematical relationships? What if the angles between stones represent astronomical calculations? What if the entire structure is a 3-dimensional encoding of knowledge that we're only beginning to decipher? We've always known Stonehenge aligns with solstices and lunar cycles. We've treated this as primitive astronomy, impressive for the era, but ultimately simple. What if it is not simple? What if the astronomical alignments are just the surface level? The part that is easy to see, and deeper layers of information are encoded in ways we haven't recognized. What if Stonehenge isn't a monument to observe the stars, but a library encoding everything the builders knew about them? Other researchers have reached similar conclusions independently. In the 1990s, engineers analyzing the Great Pyramid, dimensions found that it encodes more mathematical constants than could be coincidental. The structure contains pi, phi, the speed of light, the dimensions of Earth, all encoded in proportions and measurements. Coincidence or intentional encoding? The Atlantean texts suggest intentional, absolutely intentional. The pyramid and structures like it were built specifically to preserve knowledge in permanent form. Not knowledge for the builder's generation, knowledge for whoever came after. Knowledge encoded in stone because stone survives when everything else, paper, digital media, even metal degrades and disappears. The texts describe the encoding methods. They're complex, requiring understanding of geometry, astronomy, material science. But the principle is straightforward. Information exists in relationships. Arrange elements in precise relationships, and you encode information that persists as long as the arrangement does. We've been walking past ancient libraries for centuries, not recognizing them as libraries because they don't look like buildings full of books. They are books, giant books, written in stone and crystal, written in relationships and arrangements, written in a language we're only beginning to remember how to read. And if we can learn to read them, we'll discover that the knowledge of Atlantis, and of the first teachers before them, hasn't been lost at all. It has been waiting, patiently, encoded in structures so permanent that they'll outlast our civilization, just as they outlasted theirs. The stones remember. We just need to learn what they're saying. But the Atlantean texts describe something even stranger than memory in stone. They describe memory in life itself. Inherited knowledge that passes through generations without teaching. Pattern, inheritance beyond genetics. Modern biology recognizes genetic inheritance, DNA passing traits from parent to offspring. We understand epigenetics, environmental factors causing gene expression changes that can be inherited for a few generations. But the Atlantean texts describe something more profound, something that sounds impossible but keeps appearing in research. They observed that living systems inherit more than just genes. They inherit behaviors, knowledge, even memories, apparently. Modern experiments have found similar phenomena. Rats trained to fear specific smells pass that fear to descendants who've never encountered those smells. Birds that have never migrated still know complex routes, as if remembering journeys they never took. Humans display knowledge of patterns they've never been taught. Mathematical intuitions, linguistic structures, archetypal symbols that appear across cultures. How? How do organisms remember things they never learned? The Atlantean texts describe what they called pattern inheritance, the idea that living systems create and access pattern fields that transcend individual organisms. When many organisms of a species learn something, that learning becomes easier for future members of the species. The pattern becomes established in the species' collective pattern field. This sounds like mysticism, but in the 1980s, British biologist Rupert Sheldrake proposed an almost identical hypothesis, morphic resonance. Sheldrake suggested that patterns in nature, including behaviors and knowledge, create resonant fields that similar organisms can access. Once enough individuals learn something, it becomes easier for others to learn it, even without direct teaching or genetic transmission. His hypothesis remains controversial, but evidence keeps accumulating. Species learn behaviors impossibly quickly. Complex knowledge appears spontaneously in populations. Humans across cultures develop similar concepts independently. The Atlantean texts suggest they not only understood this principle but could deliberately encode knowledge into such fields. They describe experiments where small groups were taught complex skills. Within a few generations, those skills began appearing spontaneously in descendant populations that had no cultural contact with the original teachers. The knowledge had become heritable at a non-genetic level, encoded in the species pattern field, accessible to descendants who never been taught but could somehow remember, if this is real. If knowledge can be inherited through morphic resonance or similar mechanisms. It explains mysteries that perplex anthropologists, why agriculture appeared independently in multiple regions around the same time. Once discovered in one place, it became easier for others to discover. Why writing systems appeared suddenly in multiple cultures. The pattern of encoding language in symbols resonated across populations. Why mathematical and astronomical knowledge appears in cultures with no possible contact. The understanding became part of human pattern fields, accessible to sufficiently advanced minds anywhere. The Atlanteans believed they could deliberately encode knowledge this way. They spent centuries teaching populations, not just cultural transmission but embedding understanding so deeply that it would persist genetically and morphically. They wanted their descendants to carry their wisdom in their bones, in their instincts, in the way they saw the world. Dr. Okonkwo studied ancient myths with this framework. Myths of the time before forgetting, when all humans spoke one language and knowledge came easily. What if these aren't myths about a distant past, but about a different state of consciousness? A time when humanity had access to collective knowledge fields that we've since forgotten how to access. We've become individualized. We think of knowledge as something in individual brains. We've lost connection to collective pattern fields. But maybe we can remember. Maybe the knowledge is still there, still accessible, waiting for us to rediscover how to listen to it. The Atlanteans encoded knowledge in stone and crystal, permanent physical storage. They encoded it in genetics, biological inheritance, and they encoded it in morphic fields, collective, non-physical pattern inheritance. 3 forms of storage, 3 ways to ensure knowledge survives catastrophe. And all 3 might still be functioning, stone monuments waiting to be read, genetic capabilities waiting to express, pattern fields waiting to be accessed. The knowledge isn't lost, we are. We've forgotten how to remember. But the Atlanteans left us instructions. If we can decode them, we might reconnect with wisdom that spans tens of thousands of years. We might remember what we've forgotten, not by learning something new, but by accessing what was always there. If knowledge can be inherited, so can trauma. This is the darkest aspect of the Atlantean memory theories. The hypothesis that humanity carries collective trauma from catastrophes we don't consciously remember. Modern psychology has documented intergenerational trauma. Children of Holocaust survivors show stress responses their parents experienced, but they never did. Descendants of famine victims show altered metabolic patterns generations later. Trauma imprints on biology and passes to offspring. But what if trauma can pass not just from parent to child, but across entire civilizations? What if catastrophic events imprint on species, level pattern fields, creating inherited fears and anxieties that persist for thousands of years? The Atlantean texts describe this phenomenon in populations they taught. Groups that had no personal experience with catastrophe, nonetheless exhibited symptoms we'd now recognize as post-traumatic stress. Fear of deep water, anxiety during seismic events, terror of darkness and cold, nightmares of drowning, of everything ending suddenly. The Atlanteans recognized these as inherited responses. The populations they taught descended from survivors of the catastrophe that destroyed the first teacher's civilization. Those survivors had experienced unimaginable trauma, and their descendants carried it forward generation after generation. Now consider modern humans. We have nearly universal fears that don't match actual danger levels. More people fear drowning than fear car accidents, despite cars being statistically far more dangerous. We fear earthquakes more than we fear heart disease, despite heart disease killing far more people. Evolutionary psychology explains these as adaptations. We evolved to fear natural dangers. But the intensity of our water and earthquake fears seems disproportionate. What if these aren't evolutionary adaptations but inherited memories? What if every human alive carries genetic and morphic memory of the catastrophe that ended Atlantis? What if we all remember, at some level, the day the waters rose and civilization drowned? This would explain universal human myths about paradise lost, golden ages followed by collapse, the fall from grace. These aren't just stories, they're memories, degraded over generations but still present. We know something was lost. We can't quite remember what, but we feel the absence. We know catastrophe can come suddenly. We can't articulate how we know, but we feel the vulnerability. We know we need to preserve, to build, to record, to ensure knowledge survives. We can't explain the urgency, but we feel it. These might not be abstract philosophical intuitions. They might be inherited memories of actual events, imprinted so deeply on our species that everyone carries them. The texts end with a passage Dr. Okonkwo found heartbreaking. Those who come after will carry our ending in their dreams. They will fear water though they live on land. They will preserve knowledge, though they don't know why. They will look at ruins and feel they've forgotten something important. This is how consciousness survives catastrophe, not through books or buildings, but through the memories carried in those who continue. We hope they also carry our knowledge, not just our trauma. We hope they remember not just what destroyed us, but what we learned. Dr. Vasquez read this passage late one night and found herself crying because she recognized it. She'd always felt it. The sense that something important had been lost, that she was trying to recover something she'd never known she'd forgotten. That is why she'd searched for Atlantis. Not for fame or academic achievement, because somewhere deep below conscious thought, she remembered, she was descended from survivors, from people who'd watched civilization end, from refugees who'd carried fragments of knowledge to new lands, and like all humans, she carried that catastrophe memory, that urgency to preserve, that drive to rediscover what was lost. We're all carriers, all descendants, all inheritors of both the trauma and the wisdom of civilizations that came before. The question is whether we'll remember the wisdom clearly enough to avoid repeating the trauma, whether we'll wake up from the dream before the nightmare repeats. October 2019, an underwater city is discovered. Stone structures dated to 11,500 years ago. Written language from an era that supposedly pre-dated writing. Evidence of advanced civilization thousands of years before conventional history allows. This should have been the biggest archaeological story in decades. Front page news. Academic journals racing to publish. Funding flooding in for continued research. That is not what happened. Dr. Vasquez followed proper protocols. She submitted preliminary reports to academic peer reviewers. She contacted governmental archaeological oversight committees. She notified the international maritime authorities responsible for the region, and she encountered resistance, not skepticism. That would be expected. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Peer review is meant to be rigorous, but this wasn't rigorous skepticism. This was dismissal, refusal to even examine the evidence. One reviewer's report came back. Natural geological formations misinterpreted as artificial structures. Not uncommon in underwater archaeology. Recommend no further investigation. The reviewer hadn't visited the site. Hadn't examined the photographs. Hadn't looked at the sonar data, just dismissed it. Dr. Vasquez contacted the reviewer directly. Have you looked at the images? The stones are clearly cut, clearly positioned by human hands. The response: rocks naturally fracture in geometric patterns. You are seeing patterns that aren't there. She sent detailed photographs, showing right angles, parallel edges, intentional construction. No response. Other reviewers raised concerns about contamination of the site, suggesting that diving operations would damage fragile structures. When Dr. Vasquez pointed out they were using non-invasive documentation methods, funding was declined on grounds that the methodology was insufficiently tested. Governmental agencies proved even more obstructive. The Maritime Authority initially granted research permits without issue, but 3 weeks into the expedition, new restrictions appeared. Maximum dive times reduced. Required safety protocols that made certain investigations impossible. Requests for permit extensions denied. Dr. Vasquez asked why. The official response: environmental concerns. The site may contain fragile ecosystems that require protection. But the site was at 400 meters depth, no significant biological activity, no ecosystems that would be disrupted by careful archaeological documentation. The unofficial explanation came from a colleague who worked in governmental oversight. Someone wants you to stop. I don't know who, but pressure is being applied at levels above my clearance. Funding organizations that had previously supported Dr. Vasquez's research suddenly declined proposals, not due to scientific merit. One reviewer explicitly stated, "Your work is excellent, but we are unable to fund this particular project." Unable, not unwilling, unable, as if external constraints prevented it. Media outlets initially showed interest. A documentary producer contacted Dr. Vasquez about filming the next expedition. 2 weeks later, the producer called back. "We can move forward." Legal reviewed it and says there are liability concerns. I am sorry. What liability concerns? Archaeological documentaries happen all the time. I don't know. I wasn't told specifics, just that we can proceed. The pattern became clear: bureaucratic obstacles designed to slow, frustrate, and ultimately stop the research without outright forbidding it. If authorities had simply declared the site off limits, it would have drawn attention. Why ban research on natural rock formations? The very act of prohibition would validate the discovery's importance. Instead, they made research practically impossible through administrative friction, permit delays, funding denials, safety requirements that couldn't be met, reviews that never concluded, death by 1,000 bureaucratic cuts. Dr. Vasquez tried publishing through academic journals. The papers were accepted for review, then delayed indefinitely. Reviewers requested additional verification, but when she sought funding for that verification, she was told the findings were too preliminary to warrant investment. A perfect catch. -22. Can publish without more data? Can get funding for more data without publication? She realized normal academic channels weren't going to work. Something was preventing normal processes from functioning, so she went around them: public lectures, independent documentaries, research published through non-traditional channels. The discovery would reach people, even if it never appeared in mainstream archaeological journals. But the question haunted her: why were institutional systems preventing this information from spreading? What was threatening about an 11,500-year-old ruin? Dr. Vasquez began researching other archaeological discoveries that challenged conventional chronologies. She found a troubling pattern: Göbekli Tepe, Turkey, discovered 1994, dated to 11,500 years ago. Sophisticated stone temples built before agriculture, before cities, before anything that should have made such construction possible. Klaus Schmidt, the archaeologist who excavated the site, spent years fighting for recognition. Academic journals initially refused his papers. Colleagues suggested he made dating errors. It took decades for mainstream archaeology to accept what the evidence clearly showed. Even now, many textbooks don't include Göbekli Tepe, or mention it only as an anomaly, an exception, a mystery that doesn't fit the narrative. The Sphinx water erosion controversy. In the 1990s, geologist Robert Scotch analyzed erosion patterns on the Sphinx and surrounding structures. His conclusion: the erosion is from rainfall, not wind. But the last period of significant rainfall in Egypt was before 7000 BCE. The Sphinx is officially dated to 2500 BCE. Scotch's evidence suggests it is at least 4,500 years older, possibly much more. His research was published in peer-reviewed journals. Geological societies confirmed his methodology. The evidence is solid, but Egyptology refuses to acknowledge it, not through scientific refutation, through dismissal. The Sphinx is 2500 BCE. We know this. Contrary evidence must be flawed. The Ceruti mastodon discovery. In 2013, researchers excavated a mastodon skeleton in California with clear evidence of human modification. Bones broken with tools, stones showing use patterns. Dating 130,000 years ago. This would put humans in America 115,000 years earlier than accepted chronology. The research was published in Nature, one of the most prestigious scientific journals. Response from the archaeological community: mostly silence. The discovery is acknowledged but not integrated into textbooks, not discussed in mainstream discourse. It exists as an isolated anomaly, mentioned but not explained. The pattern repeats: ancient human footprints in New Mexico dated to 23,000 years ago, far earlier than humans supposedly reached the Americas, published in Science. Largely ignored. Stone tools in China dated to 2.1 million years ago, suggesting human ancestors left Africa far earlier than believed, published, filed away, not integrated into standard narratives. Genetic evidence of unknown archaic human populations that don't match any known species documented, acknowledged. Then, nothing. No major rethink of human evolution. Why does this happen? Not conspiracy. Something more mundane. Institutional inertia. Academic careers are built on existing frameworks. Professors teach what they learned. Textbooks repeat established narratives because revision is expensive and disruptive. When evidence challenges frameworks, the path of least resistance is minimizing it. Treat it as anomaly, exception, special case. Don't revise the whole structure. Just note that this one thing doesn't quite fit. But anomalies accumulate, exceptions multiply, and eventually the old framework can accommodate all the evidence that doesn't fit. We're reaching that point with human history. Too many discoveries don't fit the timeline. Too much evidence suggests ancient humans were more capable, existed earlier, achieved more than conventional frameworks allow. Atlantis is just the latest in a long line of discoveries that should force revision, but instead get minimized, filed away, treated as problems for future generations to solve. The institutions aren't deliberately suppressing truth. They're just doing what institutions do, preserving stability, resisting change, moving slowly. But slow movement isn't neutral when evidence accumulates faster than frameworks update. Eventually, the weight of ignored evidence becomes too great. Eventually, the old framework collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. Dr. Vasquez believed she was witnessing that collapse. The old chronology of human development can survive Atlantis, can accommodate Göbekli Tepe, can explain the genetic anomalies and architectural mysteries and early dates. The framework is breaking. The question is what replaces it, and who gets to decide. But institutional conservatism doesn't explain everything. Some of the obstruction Dr. Vasquez encountered wasn't just bureaucratic, it was strategic. 3 months after the discovery, she received unexpected visitors. 2 men in unremarkable suits, carrying credentials from a governmental research agency she'd never heard of. They were polite, professional. They asked detailed questions about the artifacts, particularly the crystal devices and the metallic tablets describing advanced technologies. "We're interested in the technical specifications," one said. "The materials analysis, the engineering principles." Dr. Vasquez showed them preliminary findings. The alloys in the tablets were unusual, combinations that shouldn't corrode, that might have properties we haven't discovered. The crystals showed evidence of information storage density far exceeding modern technology. The architectural techniques suggested knowledge of structural engineering that we've only recently redeveloped. The visitors took notes, asked if she'd be willing to consult on materials analysis, offered generous compensation, just needed her to sign non-disclosure agreements and cease public publication until security assessment was complete. She declined. Security assessment? These are archaeological findings. What security concerns could possibly? Dr. Vasquez, some technologies are sensitive regardless of age. We need to understand what we're dealing with before it enters public discourse. After they left, she researched their agency. It existed, technically. A small research division attached to defense departments, officially focused on historical technical recovery, recovering ancient technologies for potential modern application. She wasn't the first to receive such visits. Other archaeologists working on advanced ancient sites had reported similar contacts. Always polite, always polite, always professional, always with the same message: stop publishing publicly, consult privately. Sign NDAs. Most researchers declined, like Dr. Vasquez did, but some accepted, and their research disappeared into classified channels, never published, never discussed publicly again. The phenomenon isn't new. During World War II, Nazi expeditions searched for ancient artifacts and technologies. They believed ancient civilizations had possessed advanced knowledge that could provide military advantages. Cold War superpowers continued similar programs. Soviet and American research teams excavated ancient sites in Middle East, Central Asia, South America, officially for cultural heritage, but with intelligence agency oversight. Modern defense contractors fund archaeological research in regions with ancient mysteries, officially to support academic work. Unofficially, they're interested in anything that might inspire technological innovation. Ancient descriptions of flight, of energy weapons, of materials with unusual properties. These aren't just historical curiosities, they're potential research directions for modern military technology. When the Atlantean text described geothermal energy extraction with efficiencies we haven't achieved, defense researchers took interest. When the crystal devices showed information storage principles we don't fully understand, technology companies wanted access. When the metallic alloys proved unusually resistant to corrosion and stress, materials scientists wanted samples. The underwater site wasn't just archaeology, it was potential strategic resource. Dr. Vasquez learned that at least 2 classified expeditions had occurred near her research site. Government vessels with military escorts, conducting operations they refused to discuss. She filed Freedom of Information requests, denied, classified for national security. She contacted investigative journalists. They encountered similar walls. Someone doesn't want this story told. Late in 2021, the site was declared a protected heritage zone. Sounds positive. Cultural preservation, preventing exploitation. But the designation came with restrictions, special permits required for all access. Permits that Dr. Vasquez's team has been unable to obtain. Meanwhile, governmental research vessels continue visiting the area. What they're redoing there remains classified. The message was clear. The site is controlled, not destroyed, not erased. Just controlled, access limited to those with proper clearance. The knowledge isn't being shared with humanity. It is being monopolized by those with power to restrict access. Maybe they believe they're protecting humanity from dangerous knowledge. Maybe they believe they're preventing chaos that would result from rewriting human history. Maybe they believe they're securing strategic advantages in global competition. Or maybe they're just doing what powers have always done, hoarding knowledge, controlling access, ensuring advantage over those who don't know. The Atlanteans tried to prevent this. They built multiple archives, encoded knowledge in stone, distributed information widely precisely to prevent any single group from monopolizing it. But modern technology makes control easier. Underwater sites can be monitored. Academic publishing can be influenced. Information can be classified. The battle for who owns ancient knowledge is happening now, and most people don't even know it is occurring. Setting aside who controls the knowledge, the crucial question is, what do we do with it? The Atlantean archive contains both warnings and wisdom, technologies that destroyed them, and principles that might prevent us from repeating their mistakes. Consider their geothermal energy story, not because the specific technology is what we're redeveloping, but because the pattern is identical. They discovered a powerful energy source. It seemed clean, efficient, sustainable. They scaled it rapidly, building entire civilizations around it. Only later, too late, did they discover the cumulative effects they hadn't anticipated. We're redoing the same thing, not with geothermal specifically, but with multiple technologies. Fossil fuels seem like unlimited energy. We built global civilization around them. Decades later, we're rediscovering that burning them affects climate systems in ways we didn't predict. The effects accumulate slowly and visibly until suddenly they're catastrophic and potentially irreversible. The pattern matches exactly. Power source seems beneficial. We become dependent. Long-term effects only become apparent after dependence is complete. By the time we recognize the problem, reversing course is nearly impossible. Nuclear energy, incredible power density, can provide energy for entire cities from single facilities, but produces waste that remains dangerous for thousands of years, and accidents can render entire regions uninhabitable for generations. We deploy the technology before fully solving the waste problem, before understanding all failure modes, because we need the energy now. Again, power before wisdom, capability before safety, the Atlantean pattern. Or consider their consciousness technologies. They develop methods for memory transfer, cognitive enhancement, potential immortality. We reapproaching similar capabilities, neural interfaces, brain, computer integration, memory manipulation, consciousness uploading theories. The Atlanteans warned. These technologies create unbridgeable social divisions. Those who can afford enhancement become effectively a different species. Inequality becomes insurmountable. We see early versions now, cognitive enhancement drugs available to wealthy students, anti-aging treatments accessible only to the rich, the beginning stages of technological inequality that could become permanent biological inequality. Some argue this is fine. People should have freedom to enhance themselves. But the Atlanteans learned when enhancement divides populations into fundamentally different classes, social cohesion collapses. Civilizations can survive when citizens become different species. Their atomic research led to weapons that unmade matter. They tested these weapons, saw the devastation, and banned them. We developed similar weapons in the 20th century. We tested them. We saw the devastation. We limited proliferation, but didn't eliminate them. Thousands still exist, capable of ending civilization. We made a different choice than Atlantis did. We decided to live with weapons we know could destroy us, hoping deterrence prevents their use, trusting that human rationality will prevail. Maybe that works. Maybe we wiser than the Atlanteans, better at managing existential threats. Or maybe we just lucky so far. Maybe the catastrophe hasn't happened yet. Their predictive social systems, surveillance and behavior prediction that enabled unprecedented social control, led to political conflicts about freedom versus security. We built similar systems, social media algorithms that predict and manipulate behavior, surveillance technologies that track everyone constantly, data collection that enables perfect knowledge of individual patterns. We having the same debates they had. Is this security or tyranny? Is prediction valuable or dangerous? Is perfect information worth the loss of freedom? The Atlanteans eventually banned such systems. But some faction preserved them anyway. The technology survived their civilization. We haven't banned them. We redeploying them rapidly, in increasingly sophisticated forms, without clear ethical frameworks or social consensus. The pattern in all these cases: we're recreating technologies similar to those that contributed to Atlantean collapse. We're moving fast, deploying before understanding long-term effects, prioritizing immediate benefits over future risks. We're doing exactly what they warned against: capability without wisdom, power before understanding, building before thinking. The lesson isn't that these technologies are inherently evil. The lesson is that deploying powerful technologies without adequate wisdom, without social consensus, without long-term planning, that is what leads to catastrophe. Every civilization develops powerful technologies. The question isn't whether to develop them. The question is whether to develop wisdom first, whether to build ethical frameworks before building the tools, whether to establish social consensus before deployment, whether to prioritize long-term stability over short-term capability. Atlantis chose poorly. They admitted it explicitly. They warned us specifically. And now we face the same choices, with even more powerful technologies, with even less wisdom about their long-term effects. Will we learn from their mistakes, or repeat them? The answer is being written now, in our choices, in our priorities, in whether we value wisdom or just capability. But the Atlantean archive isn't just warnings, it is also guidance. Throughout their texts, certain principles appear repeatedly, lessons they wished they'd followed more carefully, foundations they believed lasting civilizations require. Dr. Vasquez's team identified 5 core principles that appear consistently enough to suggest they were fundamental to Atlantean thinking, especially in their final years when they were trying to preserve essential wisdom. First pillar: knowledge must distribute. They believed concentrating knowledge in small elite groups inevitably led to misuse and civilizational fragility. Their texts describe periods when specialized knowledge was restricted to priestly or governmental classes. This created power imbalances that corrupted both the knowledge keepers and the social structure. They came to advocate for universal education, not just basic literacy, but genuine understanding of mathematics, astronomy, engineering, ethics. They believed every citizen should understand fundamental principles of reality and society. Civilizations where everyone understands basic principles are resilient. Civilizations where knowledge concentrates in elites are fragile. If the elite is destroyed or corrupted, everything collapses. Second pillar: balance precedes building before deploying powerful technologies. Societies must establish ethical frameworks, regulatory systems, and cultural values to guide their use. This was their key mistake with geothermal energy. They built the infrastructure before establishing frameworks for managing it. By the time they realized the problems, the systems were too entrenched to dismantle. They learned: build capability slowly, build wisdom faster. Never let technological power exceed ethical understanding. The metaphor they used: a child should not carry a blade until trained to wield it safely. A civilization should not carry world-changing power until trained to wield it wisely. Third pillar: nature sets limits. The planet has carrying capacities. Systems have breaking points. Exceeding limits courts collapse. Their resource extraction seems sustainable for decades. The damage accumulated invisibly. Stress fractures in geological structures, disruptions to interconnected systems. By the time effects became visible, they were unstoppable. They learned natural systems are more interconnected than they appear. Damage in one area cascades unpredictably. Respect planetary limits, not because of mystical reverence for nature, but because exceeding them leads to systemic failure. Fourth pillar, preserve for after no civilization, is permanent. Those who survive prepare for their own ending. This became their obsession in final years, building archives, redundant storage systems, multiple preservation methods. They accepted that Atlantis would fall and focused on ensuring knowledge would survive. The principle don't assume permanence, build preservation into everything, create backups, archives, redundancies. Ensure that if your civilization falls, the next one can rebuild faster, learn from your mistakes, achieve more than you did. Fifth pillar, unity. Despite different civilizations thrive when diverse populations collaborate. They decline when factional divisions create competition rather than cooperation. Their final decades were characterized by factional conflicts. Those who wanted to restrict dangerous technologies versus those who wanted to deploy them. Those who believed in distributed knowledge versus those who wanted to maintain elite control. Those who wanted to attempt survival versus those who accepted ending and focused on preservation. These divisions weakened them more than the catastrophe itself. A unified civilization might have survived what a divided one couldn't. They learned difference is strength when it leads to diverse perspectives and approaches. Difference becomes weakness when it leads to division and competition. The key is maintaining unity despite difference, shared identity, shared goals, shared commitment to collective survival. These 5 pillars aren't mystical secrets. They're practical principles that any civilization should be able to understand and implement. The question is whether we will. Modern civilization struggles with all 5. Knowledge concentrates in educated elites. Technologies deploy faster than ethical frameworks develop. We exceed planetary limits. We don't seriously prepare for civilizational ending. Political polarization creates deep divisions. We're weak in exactly the areas Atlantis was weak. The parallels are uncomfortable, precise, almost predictive. They're not warning about specific technologies. They're warning about patterns, ways civilizations fail, regardless of specific circumstances. And we're following those patterns with remarkable fidelity. Maybe we're wiser than we think. Maybe we'll navigate these challenges successfully. Or maybe we're just another iteration in the cycle, destined to learn these lessons the hard way, hoping our own preservation protocols will teach whoever comes after us. But beneath all the technical knowledge and practical warnings, the Atlantean archive contains something more profound. Their reflections on meaning, facing extinction. Atlantean philosophers wrote extensively about the purpose of civilization itself. These texts are among the most beautiful in the archive. Thoughtful, melancholy, strangely comforting. They asked, why does it matter if knowledge survives when we won? Their answer reshaped how Dr. Okonkwo thought about human existence. They didn't see civilization as being about the survival of any particular culture or people. They saw it as a process, consciousness attempting to understand reality. The universe exists. It is structured by patterns, laws, relationships. But those patterns only become known when conscious beings observe and comprehend them. Humans are how the universe understands itself. Mathematics exists whether anyone knows it, but it only becomes meaningful when minds discover and use it. Celestial mechanics operate whether anyone observes them, but they only become understood when astronomers calculate them. Consciousness is the universe's method of self-awareness, and civilization is the structure that allows consciousness to accumulate understanding across generations. From this perspective, individual humans are temporary, but that is not tragic, because individual existence was never the point. What matters is the collective project of understanding. Each generation adds to it. Each discovery becomes foundation for future discoveries. Each question answered enables new questions. Atlantis saw itself as one chapter in an eternal book. They weren't the first to contribute. They inherited knowledge from the first teachers. They wouldn't be the last. Future civilizations would build on what they preserved. Their purpose wasn't to make Atlantis immortal. Their purpose was to add what they learned to the sum of all understanding, so that whoever gazed at the stars after them might see further. One passage, translated from the Central Chamber inscription, captures this philosophy. We are not the first to see the stars and wonder. We will not be the last. Each generation that looks up adds to understanding, builds on what came before, prepares foundations for what comes after. This is the true work, not building empires that last forever, but contributing knowledge that lasts beyond any empire. Our stones will crumble. Our names will be forgotten. But what we learned will persist, carried forward by those who come after us, even if they never know our names. This reframes everything. Mortality isn't failure. It is transition. We not ends but processes, stages in something larger than individual existence. The Atlanteans found this comforting. It gave them dignity in the face of extinction. They weren't losing everything because everything was never theirs to possess. They were contributors to an ongoing project that would continue without them. Dr. Vasquez found herself returning to these passages repeatedly. She spent her life searching for lost civilizations, and she always felt melancholy about what humanity has forgotten, what we've lost. But the Atlantean perspective offered different framing. We haven't lost anything essential. Knowledge persists even when civilizations fall. Understanding continues, even when individual cultures end. We all part of the same project they were, consciousness attempting to comprehend reality. We build on what they preserved, just as they built on what the first teachers preserved, just as future civilizations will build on what we preserve. The purpose isn't personal achievement or cultural persistence. The purpose is contribution to eternal conversation. This changes what matters, not fame, not permanence, not even survival. What matters is, did we learn something? Did we understand something? Did we add something to the sum of consciousness? Comprehension of reality. If yes, then our existence mattered, regardless of how long our civilization lasts or whether future generations remember our names. The Atlanteans knew they were dying, but they also knew their contribution persisted. They added to understanding. They preserved what they learned. They prepared for whoever came next. And in doing so, they defeated time, not by surviving it, but by connecting across it, speaking to us across 11,500 years, ensuring that their understanding would continue in our understanding. This is what civilization is for: connection. Continuation. Consciousness comprehending itself across time. We inherited their work. Now we continue it. And someday, if we re-wise, we pass it forward again. This is all we are, and it is enough. The Atlantean city Dr. Vasquez discovered is remarkable, but it is not the end of the story. It is the beginning. The archive texts reference 6 primary preservation sites, underwater cities in geologically stable deep ocean regions, each containing sealed chambers with essential knowledge. We've found one. 5 remain. The texts provide clues, coordinates relative to celestial alignments, descriptions of nearby geographical features, references to the land masses that existed before sea levels rose. Some researchers have attempted to map probable locations. The most promising sites, one possibly near the Azores Islands, an underwater plateau that was above water during the last ice age, strategically positioned in the mid-Atlantic, another potentially off the coast of India. Texts describe an eastern archive site in what is now the submerged landmass of Sunderland, a third possibly in the Caribbean. The texts reference a western site that could correspond to underwater formations near Cuba or the Bahamas. The Antarctic archive, if it exists, would be the most significant, potentially containing not just Atlantean knowledge but the earlier archives of the first teachers. Advanced sonar surveys have identified dozens of underwater geometric anomalies in these regions, structures that might be natural formations, or might be cities waiting to be explored. The technology exists now to investigate these sites: deep water submersibles, underwater drones, advanced imaging systems. We could map, document, potentially access these locations. The question is whether we be allowed to, whether the same forces that restricted access to the first site will prevent discovery of others. But beyond the underwater archives, there is another form of preserved knowledge: the megalithic structures. If the Atlantean texts are accurate, monuments like the Great Pyramid, Stonehenge, and hundreds of other sites worldwide contain encoded information. We see the surface level, astronomical alignments, mathematical constants, but deeper layers might remain unrecognized. Researchers are beginning to apply new analytical methods: 3D scanning of entire structures, computational analysis of dimensional relationships, searching for information encoded in ways we haven't previously considered. Some findings are emerging. The Great Pyramid's internal chambers align with star positions from 11,500 years ago, not from the 2,500 BCA date Egyptologists assign. Stonehenge's stone arrangements encode lunar cycles, far more complex than previously recognized. Göbekli Tepe's carvings include astronomical information about celestial events 11,500 years ago. Each of these discoveries suggests the structures encode specific dates and information from the exact period when Atlantis fell. They read not just monuments, they read time capsules, messages deliberately encoded to be readable only by civilizations advanced enough to decode them, and we re-approaching that level of advancement. We re-beginning to read what they wrote. But the most profound possibility is the genetic and morphic encoding the Atlanteans described. If knowledge can be inherited through DNA and morphic resonance, then we don't need to find all their archives. The information might be within us, accessible if we learn how to read it. Cutting-edge research in genetics, epigenetics, and consciousness studies is revealing mechanisms that sound remarkably similar to what Atlantean texts described. Genetic memory, inherited instincts that seem too complex to be random, mathematical intuitions that appear universally in humans, pattern recognition capabilities that seem innate. What if these aren't evolutionary accidents but deliberately encoded capabilities? What if the Atlanteans successfully embedded knowledge in human genetics, and we only now developing the understanding to access it? Some researchers are experimenting with techniques for accessing inherited memory, meditation practices, consciousness, altering methods, pattern recognition training that seems to awaken knowledge people didn't know they possessed. The results are preliminary, controversial, but suggestive. What if we don't need to find every archive? What if the greatest archive is within us, waiting to be accessed, containing knowledge that has been preserved for 11,500 years in the very structure of human consciousness? We stand at the threshold of the most significant rediscovery in human history. Not just finding what was lost, but remembering what we've always carried. The knowledge isn't gone. We are the knowledge. We've been the archive all along. We just need to remember how to read ourselves. But discovery alone isn't enough. The question is what we do with what we learn. The Atlantean texts didn't just warn about specific technologies. They warned about choices, moments when civilizations decide between wisdom and power, between sustainability and growth, between collective benefit and individual advantage. We face those same moments now. Climate change. Do we prioritize long-term planetary stability or short-term economic growth? Do we accept limitations on current consumption to preserve future habitability? Do we act collectively even when individual interests conflict with global needs? This is exactly the choice Atlantis faced with geothermal energy. They knew their extraction methods caused problems, but the energy was essential, and reducing it would disrupt their civilization. So they delayed, debated, hoped for technological solutions, and ran out of time. We're doing the same thing. We know fossil fuel consumption affects climate. We know the effects accumulate and could become catastrophic. But the energy is essential, and transitioning is disruptive. So we delay, debate, hope for technological solutions, and watch time running out. Different technology, same choice, same pattern. Artificial intelligence. Do we develop it carefully, establishing ethical frameworks before deployment? Or do we race to develop it quickly, prioritizing capability over safety, hoping we can solve problems after they emerge? The Atlantean Council debated this exact question about their advanced technologies. Some wanted careful, slow development with extensive safety research. Others wanted rapid deployment, believing speed was necessary for survival, and that problems could be solved through further technological advancement. The rapid deployment faction won. They were wrong. We're currently following the same path. AI capabilities are developing faster than AI safety research. Companies race to deploy before competitors, before regulations, before ethical frameworks are established. We're hoping it works out. The Atlanteans hoped too. Cognitive enhancement. Should wealthy individuals be allowed to enhance themselves and their children if it creates permanent biological inequality? Is personal freedom more important than social equality? This isn't a hypothetical future question. We're facing it now. Cognitive enhancement drugs, genetic engineering, life extension technologies. These are emerging realities, not distant possibilities. The Atlantean Council banned consciousness manipulation technologies because they created unbridgeable social divisions. We're debating whether to permit similar technologies, different specifics, same essential choice. The pattern repeats across multiple domains. Every powerful technology requires choosing between individual benefit and collective welfare, between speed and wisdom, between immediate gain and long-term stability. These aren't new choices. These are the same choices every civilization faces. And the Atlantean record shows what happens when civilizations choose poorly. They destabilize themselves, weaken their resilience, and become vulnerable when inevitable challenges arrive. The catastrophe that destroyed Atlantis might have been survivable if they'd maintained social cohesion, if they'd prioritized long-term stability, if they'd been willing to limit dangerous technologies. But they chose division over unity, growth over balance, power over wisdom. And when the catastrophe came, they couldn't survive it. Not because the catastrophe was unsurvivable, because their choices had made them vulnerable. We have their warning, we know the pattern. We can see where our current trajectory leads. The question is whether knowledge changes behavior, whether understanding the pattern is enough to break it. History suggests it might not be. Knowing what we should do and actually doing it are different things. Collective action problems are hard. Individual incentives often conflict with good. The future is abstract while the present is tangible. But we have advantages Atlantis didn't. We can see the full pattern. We have their complete warning. We know exactly what they did wrong and what the consequences were. We also have global communication, enabling coordination at scales impossible in Atlantean times. We have scientific understanding of systemic risks. We have technologies that might enable us to address challenges they couldn't. Maybe it is enough. Maybe this time we'll choose differently, or maybe we won't. Maybe the pattern is too strong, the incentives too compelling, the difficulties too great. If we fail, if we repeat Atlantean mistakes, we'll likely implement our own preservation protocols. We'll build archives, encode knowledge, prepare for whoever comes after us. We'll become the warning for the next iterations. But if we succeed, if we're the civilization that breaks the pattern, that achieves sustainability, that balances power with wisdom, we'll become something else. Proof that it is possible, that civilizations can mature, that the cycle can be transcended. The choice is ours. The outcome is undecided. The future is being written now. There is one final perspective the Atlantean texts offer, the longest view, the deepest comfort. They believed consciousness is eternal, though forms are temporary. Civilizations rise and fall. Species evolve and go extinct. Stars are born and die. But consciousness persists, expressed through whatever forms exist, continuing the eternal project of understanding reality. From this perspective, individual civilizations aren't failures when they end. They're stages in an infinite process. Each civilization contributes what it learns. Each discovery becomes foundation for future discoveries. Each question answered enables new questions. Even civilizations that fall contribute. Their mistakes teach future civilizations what to avoid. Nothing is wasted. Everything adds to the sum of understanding. The Atlanteans found profound comfort in this. It gave them dignity facing extinction. They weren't losing, they were transitioning. Their particular form was ending, but the project they contributed to would continue. They were chapters in an eternal book, not the first chapter, not the last, but chapters nonetheless, essential to the whole. This is why they focused their final years on preservation rather than desperate survival attempts. They accepted their ending, they made peace with it, and they dedicated themselves to ensuring their contribution would persist. The most beautiful passage in the entire archive appears carved deeply into the central chamber, the last thing you see before leaving the sealed room. We write these words knowing we will not see tomorrow, but tomorrow will come, and others will read them, and in that reading we will speak again. This is how consciousness defeats time, not by surviving, but by connecting. We cannot know who will find these words. We cannot know when, but we know this: whoever reads them will be us, in the way that matters most. You who find these words carry forward what we learned. You continue the work we began. You ask the questions we asked and find answers we couldn't reach. In this we are not separate. We are the same consciousness, expressed through different forms, continuing the eternal project of understanding. To you who read this, carry forward, add what you learn, pass it on. This is all we are, and it is enough. Dr. Vasquez read this passage dozens of times. Each time, she felt something shifting in her understanding of human existence. We're not isolated individuals, living brief lives, dying and disappearing. We're continuations of everyone who came before us, carrying forward the sum of all human understanding, preparing foundations for everyone who comes after. The Atlanteans speak through us now. Their discoveries inform our science. Their warnings guide our choices. Their questions inspire our research. They're not dead, they're present, active, speaking through every scientist who builds on their mathematics, every philosopher who contemplates their wisdom, every person who looks at ruins and wonders. and we'll speak through future civilizations. Our discoveries will inform their science. Our warnings will guide their choices. Our questions will inspire their research. This is immortality, not individual survival but collective continuation, not preserving our particular forms but contributing to eternal process. From this perspective, questions about whether our civilization will survive become less urgent. Of course we won't survive forever. Nothing does. Planets die. Stars burn out. Universes may end, but consciousness persists. Understanding accumulates. The conversation continues. Our responsibility isn't ensuring our particular civilization lasts forever. Our responsibility is ensuring we contribute well to the eternal project, that we add to understanding rather than merely consuming, that we pass forward more than we inherited. The Atlanteans did this. They received knowledge from the first teachers, added their own discoveries, and passed it all forward to us. Enriched, expanded, accompanied by warnings, earned through painful experience. Now it is our turn. We've received knowledge from everyone who came before. Atlanteans, Egyptians, Greeks, every civilization that contributed to human understanding. We'll add our own discoveries, and we'll pass it all forward, enriched by what we learn, warned by our own mistakes. This is the eternal cycle. Not futile repetition, but infinite enrichment. Each iteration adds something new. Each civilization contributes something the previous ones couldn't. We're not separate from Atlantis. We're Atlantis's continuation, asking their questions deeper, using their foundations to build higher, benefiting from their mistakes to choose better. And whatever civilizations come after us, whether in centuries or millennia, they'll be our continuation, building on our foundations, benefiting from our warnings, carrying forward the eternal work. This is what it means to be human, to participate in consciousness's eternal project of understanding itself, to contribute what we can, to pass forward what we've learned, to connect across time, speaking to the future as Atlantis spoke to us. This is all we are, and it is enough. The waters of the Atlantic are dark tonight, just as they were on the 12th of October, 2019, when sonar first detected what shouldn't exist. 400 meters below the surface, the city still waits. Stone walls carved with warnings and wisdom. Sealed chambers protecting knowledge that spans 11,500 years. Messages written specifically for us for this moment. We've decoded some of those messages. We've learned what Atlantis achieved and what destroyed them. We've discovered that we're not the first advanced civilization, possibly not even the third or fourth. We've learned that human history is far older, far more complex, far more tragic and beautiful than we imagined. We've learned that we're inheritors, that we carry genetic and mimetic legacy from civilizations we forgotten. That knowledge persists even when names and monuments dissolve into time. And we've learned that we face the same choices they faced, the same decisions between wisdom and power, the same tension between immediate benefit and long-term survival, the same question every civilization must answer: will we build for tomorrow or consume today? The Atlanteans could answer that question in time. They achieved remarkable things, understood the stars, built impossible structures, developed technologies we're only now beginning to comprehend, but they developed capability faster than wisdom. Power before understanding, and when catastrophe came, they were vulnerable. They tried to ensure their knowledge would survive, even if they couldn't. They built archives, encoded information in stone and genetics, distributed wisdom as widely as possible. They wanted whoever came after to benefit from what they learned, to avoid their mistakes, to achieve what they could. Their preservation worked. We found their messages, we rereading their warnings, we relearning their lessons. Now the question is what we do with what we've learned. Will we be the civilization that breaks the cycle, that achieves sustainability, that balances power with wisdom, that passes forward not just knowledge but actual survival? Or will we repeat the pattern, make the same choices, and become the next warning that future civilizations might discover, might decode, might learn from? The answer isn't written yet. It is being written now, in our choices, in our priorities, in whether we remember what Atlantis tried so desperately to teach us. The waters are dark, the depths are vast, the past is patient, and somewhere beneath the waves, stone walls wait with messages we're only beginning to understand. Messages that might save us, if we're wise enough to listen. Close your eyes now. Rest. The story is told. But the story is told. But the story isn't over. It continues in you, in what you choose. in what you remember, in whether you carry forward the wisdom of those who came before, adding your own understanding, passing it on to those who come after. This is how consciousness defeats time. This is how knowledge survives catastrophe. This is how we become more than our brief individual lives. We connect, we continue, we contribute. The Atlanteans spoke across 11,500 years to reach us. Now we speak forward, to whoever comes next, to whoever finds our ruins and wonders, and the eternal conversation continues. Sleep now, but remember what was found beneath Atlantis. Remember what it changed, remember what it means. And when you wake, carry it forward.